So welcome to this day on Psychology of Change. It's so lovely to have so many of you here with us. I'm feeling very buoyed up by the arrival of spring after this very long winter, feeling very appreciative of sunshine and birdsong and all of that. And I'm hoping that that spring energy stays with us right the way through today. So in terms of who I am. So I'm Benna Waits. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I work as part of Ann Arbor University Hospital and part of the improvement team ABCI in that health board in Southeast Wales. I'm here in my capacity as sort of supporting and co-leading the Psychology for Improvement work that we've been undertaking for just over the last year, that's been funded by the Q community. So we'll post a link to that at the end of the day, so that if you want to find out more about that. But that piece of work's been very active in spite of the pandemic, and is beginning to reach its final stages. So you'll hear more from us in the weeks to come in terms of resources that we want to make available for people. So this is our team supporting today. I'll introduce Kate in a moment. Who've been really actively involved in the work, and in fact all of these people are involved in the Psychology for Improvement steering group. So we've drawn our support team today from that group. Myself and Charlie Jones will be the chat monitors, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how we'd like you to use the chat for today in a little bit. Sam Thornton has moved mountains to get here this morning. He is our Zoom czar for today, which is a highly challenging role because, as you said, Jude, the courage involved in all of us stretching ourselves way out of our comfort zones is very present for all of us. Sam had to be Zoom czar this morning with no broadband, so it's something of a minor miracle that he's here. So we're hoping that that will run smoothly from here on in, but please bear with us if there are some challenges. We've got Rachel Trask on timekeeping, and in fact Laura is going to be supporting her today, I think. So that's the team that are kind of sitting around this day. So in terms of housekeeping, and I'll pause at the end of this housekeeping bit just to make sure I haven't missed anything. We're going to be recording the session, so if you don't want to be recorded, please just switch your cameras off, although we'd ask you to, we've got a whole range of activities for you over the course of the day, so please put your cameras back on for the small breakout sessions. Those won't be recorded. We invite you, and it is only an invitation because we appreciate that life is challenging and difficult, and many of us have multiple responsibilities and roles. But if you are able to, please switch off your emails and phone. This is a day that we're hoping will help people be really present and involved and engaged. We've done a lot of thinking about trying to make it a day that you feel involved in, to try and overcome that frustration of not being able to be in a room together, which is what we'd really hoped this day would be about. So please try to be present. If you can't, so if you are pulled away, we ask that you leave the meeting and rejoin it. We'll readmit you, but that just means that if we end up scrambling to break out and it's a pair, somebody won't be in a pair with kind of nobody at the other end. Please leave comments in the chat and I'll say a bit more about that, but please kind of react, respond, contribute. We want this to feel like a community, so please contribute. Do mute yourself. We should be able to mute you, but mute yourself when you're not on, so we don't have background noise unless you're speaking or asking a question. And we'd really like this to feel like a safe space, so please listen to each other and respect each other's views. We'll have an evaluation form coming out to you. That will be emailed, but it will also be posted in the chat. My feeling is generally it's much easier to evaluate an event when it's fresh in your mind, so look out for that towards the end of the day. And you'll have seen from the timetable, and you should have had emails about this at the end of our day. So we have programmed in some listening spaces for those people who've signed up to them in advance. So that's 4 till 5. So it's an opportunity to participate in that practice. We're also going to keep the main room open 4 till 5, and Kate has agreed to stay with us. So if people want to stick around at that point, you're very welcome to. But the programmed day finishes at 4. We're aware that it is a long day, 9:30 till 4, and completely understand if you want to head off at that point. So in terms of our Google Doc, this is an initiative that we thought might be helpful for capturing people's thoughts and views. And what I'm going to explain to you now is how you use the Google Doc.
How much is left?
Oh, somebody's not muted, I think. If you can just check your mutes. I just had a disembodied voice from somewhere. So Sam, I think, is about to post. I can't see the chat, so I'm hoping Sam's able to post the link to a Google Doc. So what we thought was that the chat function can sometimes get very, very busy, a bit overwhelmed, and that it might be helpful for people to have a space to collect together their feedback, their learning, their longer term questions about this work. So for us, this is a piece of work which we see as very much ongoing. So the field of psychology for improvement feels like absolutely one that is a developing, evolving one. And we really want your involvement in that to kind of co-create that with us. So the Google Doc will be something that we can take forward and pick up your kind of thoughts within. So you'll see, if you click on the link, that you will have a section for feedback, so ideas and comments that you have about what Kate's presenting to you, your learning, any particular kind of key insights or ideas, and any longer term questions. So that's what the Google Doc is for. The chat, or any more burning questions that you'd really like us to try and pick up today, or any themes that you feel you'd really like us to be picking up over the course of the day. Charlie Jones and myself will be monitoring the chat, and we might come to you. If you post something in the chat, we might say, for example, Fiona, we noticed that you kind of posted something about this and, you know, wondered if you want to say a little bit more about that. We've got 2 sections in the day where we'll be picking up some of the themes in the chat. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the difference between the Google Doc and the chat. We'll have to see whether it feels helpful and whether it works, but it's over to you to kind of use it as you want to. Okay, so this is, we were aware that with so many of you being here, we couldn't have a kind of talky, a fully sort of talking warm up and hear everybody, but we thought it'd be really interesting to see where you all are. So you should see at the top of your screen, in fact, for me, this function is hiding slightly underneath my camera, but you should, Kate, thank you so much. So for those of you, so most of you are joining from the UK, so we would invite you to use the annotate function. So if you click on annotate at the top of your screen and then click on stamp, you should be able to put a stamp as to where you are on the UK. If you are joining from somewhere else in the world that is not the UK, please put your dot on the world map. We don't think we have many of you, so we've got Kate, who is flashing up there, and we think we possibly had one other, but we'll see. That's fabulous. So we have our map. We have it peopling away in terms of where you're all coming from, and lovely to see a pretty good spread across the UK. So it looks like most of you are grasping that function, which is fabulous. So I guess this is what we'd hoped, is a kind of community of people. And I suppose one of the advantages of us being in this virtual world is that some of you are here with us that might have struggled had we had an event in a single location. So I guess we should celebrate the wonder that is the virtual world. I know many of us experience considerable frustration with it, but yes, so that's fabulous. Thank you for doing that. So it just remains, unless there's anything that I have forgotten to say. I think I was going to say Twitter handles actually, so let me say that briefly. So our Twitter handle for today is @psychology4i, and that's 4 with a number, so psychology4i. And you can also use Kate's, which is @KateB.Hilton, @KateB.Hilton. So please feel free to participate in the conversation on Twitter too. So Kate Hilton, many of you, I'm guessing, will know, and that may well be why you've come. Kate is very well known for the work she's done with the IHI on psychology of change. She's also, I think, played a really important role in this piece of work. So there's a core group in our steering group who attended an event that Kate ran I think a couple of years ago in London, and that sense of psychology of change and psychology for improvement being a field that we really needed to think about. So she's been quite influential for us in this piece of work. And certainly when we got the funding, one of the first things we knew we wanted to do was invite Kate along to share her thinking and to spend some time with us, because certainly those people that worked with her before found it an incredibly energizing and inspiring day. So Kate, it's fantastic to have you here with us. I'm going to hand over to you now. So let me just stop my sharing and hand over to you.
Thank you, Benna. I would be completely remiss not to give a huge shout out to Benna and Rachel and Sam and Anna and Charlie for all the support and planning and feedback that went into the design for today, and the support roles they'll be playing all day with us, and of course for inviting me to join all of you. I'm really delighted. Thank you to all of you for making this day together. It is going to be a great day. We have so much fun ahead of us. Yeah. And so we're just gonna dive right in. And I'm joining you, as the map indicated, from Hanover, New Hampshire, here in the United States. And I would be delighted to also join you at some point in person in the UK. I'm not quite vaccinated yet, but as soon as I am. All right, so here we go. So this is the plan. This is our plan for today. And I hope you all have the agenda. This should sort of be spelled out there, as well as the timings for today. But really the plan is to do sort of a high level overview early on around the framing for this work. Then we'll get into the 5 domains within the psychology of change framework. And we're going to play around a little bit more time in some than others based on historically where people enjoy learning new things within the framework, and we'll be practicing things, trying them on for size. So it should be a very much a roll up your sleeves kind of day, and we'll be doing a lot of breakout work. We'll be doing some individual work. You'll have seen in the materials that were sent to you a variety of different exercises, and so it should be very interactive. We'll take times for questions and reflection, take times for break, and so you should have everything. I would encourage you, if you're just sort of gathering yourself for the day now, to go back to that email and download some of those materials so that you'll have them at the ready. For those that love to have things printed out, go ahead and print out any of the exercises so that you have a chance to work with them on paper and pen. And of course, the Google document will be an ongoing place to collectively learn, which should be fun. I'm really excited for the experiment that is our Google document, because not only do we get to capture our own individual learning, but we get to learn from each other through it. So it should be sort of like the mind meld of the psychology of change, which I'm looking forward to what you all have to contribute. So yeah, and there it is, the Google Doc. And I love this bottom one, the bike rack. There are going to be things that come up today that we just won't have time to get to. But that doesn't mean that there won't be spaces and places together within this community to continue to answer and address some of those questions. And that is our hope for this community, that it will be an ongoing group that will continue to do learning and exploration and exercise your own agency and leadership about this content area and how to take it forward in your own place or across your places with each other in new collaborative ways. So please, if you have little insights about that and we just don't get to them today, I know that part of the intention for this group is to create space to do just that. And to deepen and further explore anything that comes up. So I think with that, I'm going to shift over to just some group norms about how we want to be together, so that we're pretty clear about, we're all dedicating our most very precious resource, which is our time and our attention. And so how we are together really matters. We have about, 8 hours to be. And so how should we use it? What should we do? And so the first set of norms I wanted to go over and invite us to consider. Let me first start with the habits of the heart. So this is something I'm hoping will come through in the chat for you. It was a handout. And this actually comes from Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French aristocrat who came to the United States in the early 1800s to study the newly formed democracy. And he coined the term the habits of the heart. Based on what he observed as people freely associated with one another. And he said that the mother of all forms of knowledge was the power to combine. The power to combine. The mother of all forms of knowledge is the power to combine. And what he observed as people combined their resources with one another, freely associating to create new power, was that they had some habits. And so a wonderful teacher named Parker Palmer, we're going to be drawing on some of his work later as well. He teaches at the Center for Courage and Renewal. He took these habits and further elaborated on them, as the first being at the bottom, an understanding that we're all in this day together, right? We're inextricably linked to one another. How you do and how you show up affects how I do and how I show up. So that's number one. Number two is an appreciation for the value of otherness. So even though we are in this together and we're connected, we value we're not the same, that there's different voices, that there's different perspectives and different perches and experiences here with us. And that's what makes it so rich. The third is an ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. I think this is probably the most important habit. This is the ability to see that we might not always agree, but when that happens, to lean in with curiosity and to invite further understanding in ourselves of what we might be missing, or how else we might try to communicate in a way to better support others' learning or our own. The fourth is a sense of personal voice and agency. So this is the idea that even though we are linked and we appreciate one another, we also are here to show up. So an invitation to invite you to exercise your voice in the chat, in our breakouts, and during our discussions, and certainly all day on the Google Doc. And then fifth, the capacity to create community. So community doesn't just happen. It's intentional. It's something that we work toward, that we create, that we make a commitment to doing. And so that's the fifth. So I wanted to start with the first norm around the habits of the heart. How do you greet those? Thumbs up. Do you guys see the, let's see, we should have next to something, the ability to put little, yeah, there you go. Dan's got it. The thumbs up emoji. You guys see the emojis? Are we thumbs up for the habits? Yeah, that's the thing. We have to agree if we're going to do it, right? Okay, and then the others here you see is sort of just an encouragement and permission to bring your whole self to the day. This, we hope, is a very safe place. We hope that you might see some colleagues you know. We also hope that you'll be surrounded by some very new folks that you don't, and that you may show up with your colleagues in certain ways. We invite you just to be yourself today, and certainly lean in towards your own curiosity around questions that come up. And all teach, all learn. So again, we'll be putting a lot of the work on for size. And sometimes it'll be like getting on the bicycle, where what happens as soon as we get on the bicycle? Somebody unmute themselves. What happens as soon as we get on a bicycle for the first time?
Sometimes you're a bit unsteady. Fall off.
You fall off. You try really hard to balance.
Graciously or ungraciously?
What's that, Colin?
Graciously or ungraciously?
Exactly, right? So I really want to invite you all to imagine yourself on a bicycle for the first time. You might imagine a grandchild or child getting on a bike, being super excited. Can't wait to learn this skill, but also a little scared, and then maybe a little teetery, right? And maybe you find yourself kind of whoopsie, and you catch yourself, or you see that with somebody else. And what we want to really create is just an invitation to exercise that courage muscle today, as we invite you to try and hopefully what are some new skills. So just a real invitation into that as we do some all teach, all learn. Okay, so one more thumbs up. Are we good with our communication norms? Terrific. Okay, then we have some just more logistical ones to make sure that we're dialed in. So thank you for all of those that are able to turn on your video. I want to acknowledge that the video is just so terrific to create togetherness. I also want to acknowledge that sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you do need a break. Sometimes you just, it's hard to be on all day. So I know that. It's okay if you can't always have your video on, but we do invite you to try to have it on as much as you feel comfortable. And then certainly just to be attentive and to be with us so we can make the most of our time together without distraction, which is hard when you're on your computer and little things pop up all over the place. So a real invitation to try, if you can, to pretend that we're in a workshop room together where that would not be happening. Or if it were, you would be leaving the room to go address it and come back. And we'll help you with the mute from a hosting standpoint, but certainly unmute yourself too. We want to hear you. We'll use the emojis a lot, so let's get really comfortable with emojis. Everybody pick a favorite emoji right now. What's your fave? Let's see them. All right, I'm seeing some. Not everybody yet. Do you know where they are? Can you see them down there? The reactions. And to go in the reactions, there's also a raise hand function in there where you can put your hand up and down. Okay, good. Loving these. Great. Thank you. So whenever you see something that you like or that maybe you don't like, you want to give it the big thumbs down. That's fine. Just, feel free to also express yourself through the technology that we have. Let's make good use of it. Please also feel free to move around, stretch, fidget, doodle, do what you need to do to allow yourself to be present in the way that works for you. And if you do need to sign off, because we are going into breakouts, and I think Benna covered this, but just to be really explicit, if you're not here and you go into breakout, your partner won't be able to work with you. So sign off if you're actually leaving the session and then sign back in, that's fine. But that way it just won't mess up any of your colleagues' experience. And then with regard to, if you just have to take a quick walk away, come back, then don't worry about it. Stay on. Fun. So I thought we warm ourselves up with some hand jiving. So should we get a little hand jiving going this morning? Okay, good. All right. This feels like there's some really nice jiving here. Ooh, I like the way you all look. Beautiful. Okay, so hand jiving can just spontaneously happen, and maybe somebody else will get somebody else jiving, and then suddenly we'll all be jiving for just a moment, and back we go again into the session. So feel free to bring your playfulness. You heard the music. There'll probably be a little dancing off and on, and you might bring one of your superpowers to the group today. So consider what that might look like. And then, so far, are we good on these norms? Do these feel productive and like a space you want to be in for a long period of time? Okay, so then if we're agreeing that these are, thanks, thumbs up, I love it. If we're agreeing that these are our norms, then we also need to be accountable because we might break our norms, right? They hopefully are pretty fun ones. We're not going to be too hard on each other, but I actually offer this as a teaching as much as anything else, which is that when we do make agreements, we can't always live into them. We have these aspirations about how we want to be, but sometimes we don't always, we're just not always perfect, right? And that's okay too, but we should be accountable. And certainly when we're working with teams, like our improvement teams, and we set norms about how we want to work together, we also want to be accountable when we break norms. So what I love to do with a team is as soon as we set norms, I like to break a norm. Because I like to show it's okay if we're not perfect, and that when we do break a norm, we're going to live into what we call an accountability norm. An accountability norm. And that doesn't have to be a punishment. It's not like, it could be, it could be like little like $5 in the kitty, that could hurt, right? But that kitty might go to the team's party at the end of our big, successful work together. But what I'm saying is you can have some a type of accountability norm that could actually build the team's culture. So you could offer a love note to the team about what you love about the people on the team, right? and raise them up and thank them and appreciate them as a way to acknowledge when you have misstepped. Maybe you showed up late for a meeting, or maybe you communicated in a way you wish you hadn't, or what have you. So I would like to propose one for us, which is to just simply offer a chat love note to the group if you find yourself breaking a norm. And what do you guys think of that one? We could also get back into hand jiving. That could be you could do a solo spotlight hand jive. Yeah, do you guys like the love note? Okay, all right, you got the idea here. Okay, so let's get right into it. I think we're great on time. Thank you, Benna, for keeping us on time too. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Laura. Laura's our timekeeper. And so she'll be sending little messages to me to make sure that I'm using our most precious resource as wisely as possible here. So we're crushing it. Okay. So let's get into this next session. Let's ask you a question. This session's all about change. What changes have you experienced this year? Let's chat these in. Okay, Charlie, what are we seeing in the chat?
Everything is changing. Changes in family and work, changes in agency. Yeah, lots of responses, Kate. It's obviously hot.
Yeah, so many. Thank you. Good. We want you to locate change in yourself, in your body even, because we're gonna be reflecting about change, not only for how we bring change to others, but what does it feel like when we are experiencing change? So we'll be doing a lot of that today. Let me ask you, Anna, what sort of changes have you experienced in the past year?
So I work clinically with children and young people in mental distress. And so for me, I normally go into a clinic to do that. But during COVID, I've only been able to go into the clinic every other week, many of us. So I've been seeing patients from my kitchen, which has felt like quite a big change in boundaries. I've had a new co-worker in my cat that seems to love to get my attention by sitting on my laptop just in the wrong kind of moments. I've had to wear masks and get used to having even worse hair than normal, frankly. Having to cope with showing up online, not looking the way I want to look. And then hopping from one meeting to another on various different platforms, to the point that at times my body and my mind has felt like being a battery chicken, really, with very little exercise. And then, you know, the lockdown, feeling the love from people about working in the NHS. There's one road that I drive down to get to the clinic, and every single house had a rainbow in it, and every single house had a message for us on the way into the hospital, which was just phenomenal. Whilst also kind of just feeling humble that we're just doing our job and we are paid to do our job, and, you know, noticing the extremes of my emotions.
Yeah, thank you. And I see so many of your colleagues in the chat agreeing in terms of, especially the working from home. Freddie, I appreciate the fear at work. A lot of intense emotions and experiencing so much change, and also feeling under threat in some of that change, very real threat. Also feeling loss and grief this year, big deals. And so, you know, we're gonna look at some of those experiences together today and honor them as part of our change work. And let me just also say, I feel you on the hair. I noticed the first day of spring for me was the first warm day when I could get a hairdresser to come cut my hair outside. I was like, spring is here.
I have to say, I also missed actually wearing shoes. And I know that sounds weird, but, you know, I've just been in slippers a lot of the time. These small things have made a difference.
Some silver linings. Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right, good. So we want to also not just notice the change, we want to also notice what kind of change this is. What kind of change are we even talking about when we locate like all the things that you just laid out in the chat? What kind of change is that? And we want to pay attention to that, because in healthcare, many of us have been trained rather technically to fix people's problems, right? To learn an enormous amount that allows us to develop an expertise in which we can diagnose a problem, which sometimes isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, but often You know, I break my arm, I need to have it set, right? I have appendicitis, I need to get it out. And so ideally, you know, we're looking for new knowledge that provides a quick fix, the extent to which, like in COVID context, would be a vaccine. You know, something that we can deliver that could really help people at a massive scale. That is a technical solution, that it was developed by the experts like you and I, well, maybe some of you, but not myself. I don't have the expertise to develop a vaccine. However, what you've named in the chat, I have in fact not yet seen a technical challenge. I have seen the types of change that requires our own learning, that we as the stakeholders with lived experience of the problem, we are the ones who solve it and keep it solved for ourselves, for our families, for our colleagues, for our communities. And we don't just get there overnight. You know, think back to a year ago. And when you first started experimenting with some of this change, how did that feel? Just close your eyes for just a second and just take yourself back to a year ago March and locate in your body the things you were experiencing. I mean, I was like adrenaline. I was all adrenaline. I had that threat. Whoop, 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 whoop. I became a prepper. I had all this stuff in my basement that I never had before. I mean, it was like, how can I control this situation for my family? And I was awake all the time. I wasn't eating that much, right? You have literally physiological response because of the way that your brain responds when you're having a threat. And all change, subtly, truly, is a tiny bit of threat. So as change agents, we have to acknowledge that others may experience this change that we're pretty pumped about as a threat because it invites them to have to try something differently, to operate a little bit differently in the world. And that may take a little navigation. Now, some may give us the thumbs up emoji right away, right? But others may say, I don't know, so I don't know quite yet, right? I'm going to have to experiment a little bit with this before I'm ready. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. So let's shift that focus from our own experiences to experiences with others. So in your improvement work, right? In your improvement work, when you're working with other folks, what types of adaptive barriers do you experience, right? You see a whole bunch listed here on this slide. What are some of your top barriers? Go ahead and chat them in. When you're working with your colleagues to advance improvement work, innovation, change, something to make things better for your patients, for your colleagues, what gets in the way when we're working on adaptive change? What are we seeing, Benna? Oh, you're muted.
We're seeing things like lack of buy-in, fake buy-in, ego,
not getting the basics right.
Yeah.
My lack of clout, power, motivation.
Terrific.
Ego.
Yep. Okay, I want to invite folks now. We're going to get you in your first breakout. And in this breakout, we're going to invite you to reflect with another colleague about how this comes up in your work. What actually is happening? Because today, in a sense, we're workshopping this. We're workshopping your adaptive barriers to change. So we really need to be clear about what are they? How do they show up for me in the work that I'm doing? So I think with that, Sam will magically move you. So what were some of the things that you heard? We chat in a few things that that you shared, but that you heard from the partner you were with.
I just suggest that people mute themselves again as well, because you've all come back unmuted. Is that okay? Thank you.
Maybe but I'm going to invite one person to unmute. How about Jude? I love the name Jude. Jude, would you unmute? Are you able to unmute? I cold called you, Jude. I totally put you in the hot seat. Are you okay with that? It's okay if you're not okay with that.
I'm noticing Deirdre,
Yeah,
I think, put her hand. Oh, are we good? Kedar, your Dr. Kedar, you're not mute. Thank you. Deirdre put her hand up. Kate, Deirdre, should we come to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe Jude couldn't figure out how to unmute. Sorry,
Yeah.
Jude. All right. Okay, we'll try you later. Deidre, let's hear. Oh, are you able to unmute? Maybe no one can unmute.
No, I can unmute. Sorry,
Okay.
I had on and then that was me. That wasn't the thing. Oh, sorry, I was talking to Pauline and she was saying that, you know, when people are asked about change, if it's still within their comfort zone, that's okay. But it's when you're been asking people to do that thing that's new and outside their comfort zone. And obviously with COVID, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of untried. So yeah, that's kind of, we talked about that.
Yeah, terrific. Great. So, you know, new habits that need to form. Oh, Jude's got it now. Are you gonna? Yes.
She's got it. She's got it. I had a great chat with Liz. My experience of change, and I've been working in the NHS for 30 years, and whenever we talk about reorganization or transformation or reconfiguration, so many people say, let's just wait until the new government happens, we get the budget sorted, the chief exec gets replaced. There's always, well, in my experience, there's very frequently a reason why we can't do anything just yet. So the waiting feels more self-soothing in my experience than the doing. So there's a whole list of reasons why we can't, and it seems to soothe the soul. So the reasons, I think, are quite elaborate when I ask, why can't you do whatever it is?
Isn't inertia a powerful force? Thank you, Jude. That's terrific. I mean, it's terrible actually, but you know, it's insightful. I might sometimes call on people like I did with Jude, because I'd like to hear from just about everyone before this day is over. So, you know, if you just, and I want to see if you're still with me. So how about you, Alan? Alan McKinsey? How you doing, Alan? It's nice to see you.
Hi. Yeah, good. Thank you. How are you?
Good.
So what I heard about was the sort of perception of energy depletion. So due to the pandemic, people are feeling tired and on their knees, and as a result of that, it's just another thing. It's almost that straw that breaks the camel's back sort of idea.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're going to talk about some antidotes to all of these today, to inertia, to low energy, to competing priorities. So thank you for what you shared and what you shared with each other. So let's just zoom out for 1 sec. I'm going to go through this part really quickly, but so bear with me. But I do want to just do a little framing around why does it matter? Why are we doing this? Why spend so much time thinking about the psychology of change? And does anyone know who this lovely lady is? She's British. Come on. This is Doris Lessing, one of your Nobel laureates. She wrote the book, The Prisons We Choose to Live Inside. And I'm going to grab the quote so I don't misquote her. She said, I'm not going to grab the quote. She basically said something to the effect of, we know more about ourselves now than we did in the past, but very little of it has been put into effect. I got the quote, that was it. We know more about ourselves now than we did in the past, but very little of it has been put into effect. What is she saying? We know more about ourselves now than we did in the past, but very little of it has been put into effect. Yeah, Liz.
I guess we're very good at describing problems, but not very good at solving them, taking action, really.
Yeah, we know we have an economy of knowledge. Boy, do we ever. I mean, look at the evidence that we produce. Look at the evidence that you produce. Look at the evidence that some tiny part of a discipline that you're involved in produces every day. How many journals you have to keep up with. We know more about ourselves than we did in the past, but very little of this knowledge has been put into use. You know what we love to solve? Technical problems. We love new knowledge. But taking that knowledge and putting it into action, there is a big gap between what we know and what we do, right? And I think about this, my background is in organizing. I think about this in terms of power, that we have a knowledge economy, but what we need is a power economy. What we need is to develop power between us. And what I mean by that is the ability to bring together our assets to put that knowledge into effect. And this gap, this line here between what we know and what we do, which is only ever increasing because we generate knowledge at such a like exponential rate, we cannot possibly keep up. This is what I call the justice line. It is an injustice, and that is what Lessing was pointing out. It is an injustice that we can't keep up with what we know to do. Now, we aren't perfect. We need accountability norms and so on. We have aspirations, right? But this is an issue for many of us about seeing something that we know is wrong and that we can make better. And that's what improvement has always been. It's always been a justice movement around making things better for patients, making it better for colleagues, and so on. So we're part of that in the work as a change agent. And this is Anna's slide. Anna, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, very happy to. This comes really from Marjorie Godfrey's work at Dartmouth Institute, where she says that when you break improvement down, 20% of it is the technical side of it. It's the evidence, the measures, the tools, and the methods that we use as improvers. But then in the improvement journey, 80% of it is really about people. It's about the psychological or adaptive things that we need to do to kind of use those tools. So it's about team and group dynamics, it's about culture and leadership, it's about behaviors and habits, it's about power and the quality of relationships. And essentially, it's also about trust and trust in each other, which is why teamwork is so important for improvement. And it really taps into the kind of questions about why would anybody be motivated to get involved in change or improvement? And what can we do as improvers to try and stimulate that sense of engagement and involvement?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, and part of that then is even if we know what we need to do, we want to grow that power. We want to close that gap, right? And that means we need people to join us in changing their behavior to adopt that new solution. And it might be multiple stakeholders across the system that have to do different things because often we're dealing with pretty complex change. And so of course, we have the folks that are early adopters and so on, but we often reach, this is the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation curve, this chasm where we kind of run out of the good feelings and we have some people who are resistant to that change, which is normal. It's not a bad thing. But we have to figure out what behaviors we're going to take forward together with our people to cross that chasm so that the change is adopted across the system. And what I want to invite you to do is to think about that sort of mathematical bell curve in a really different way. It's true what Rogers is saying, but what is also true is that it's based on how people feel about change. And sometimes you're excited about the change, but sometimes you yourself are angry about the change, right? And so we know, if you think back to a year ago in your own lives, there may have been a couple changes that you were forced to make that you weren't so happy about, right? And what it's like when we're forced to make a change versus something that we choose to make, and the different feelings that we have. So the really good news is we can feel empathy for folks that, I like the word traditionalist versus laggard. That's just the person who's not feeling ready, because we know what it's like ourselves, and we should expect that because many people encounter many different feelings when they encounter change. And these are some of the feelings. So this is William Bridges. He's an organizational consultant. This is the psychology of change in terms of the psychological states that we go through, starting with a state of denial, moving to resistance, then exploration, and then commitment. And so locating yourself a year ago, where would you have found yourself on this curve? What emotions might you have been feeling? Now let me notice you may not have felt them so linearly. You might have had more than one feeling at the same time. We are complex humans. You may have also had more than one feeling about different changes that you were encountering at once, right? How about Anna Lewis? Anna Lewis, would you be kind enough to unmute yourself? How were you feeling a year ago?
I'm trying to think where in that quadrant, but I would say what comes to mind is kind of a loss of control, not kind of knowing what I thought the world was about anymore.
So maybe would uncertainty fit?
Yeah, uncertainty, but maybe a bit more fundamental than that. A sort of everything normal seems to evaporate very quickly.
Yeah, disoriented even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And how do you feel today, Anna?
I guess kind of evolved to it, hopeful that it will still change, and you know, seeing glimmers of hope for that, but feeling that what we've all gone through in the last year will never quite leave us. But yeah, less in that sort of what the hell's going on space, and more in the we can cope with this even if we're not comfortable with it space.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And I think yeah, colleagues are also chiming in the chat here around feelings on the more on the left side of this, and curious as to how you all see yourselves today. I find that I'm starting to feel I'm feeling some anxiety about getting back to certain things, which is really like, I never imagined I would feel that way. It's like a year ago, that was inconceivable. So I'm starting a change process again. Good. All right. Hopeful and excited. Good, Jason. Good to hear. Yeah, going backwards. Yeah, Simon, do you want to say about people going backwards?
Well, I suppose just I've seen you present this slide, Kate, with the timeline, and I think we all expect that we'll progress through the stages, like grief and then into hopeful acceptance and part of our life. But a number of folk in the chat, and probably I as well, have gone back along the timeline. So maybe it's kind of cycles of this, depending on the context. I mean, I think I remember being quite hopeful at the start and experimenting with lots of really cool things we could do to support people. Whereas now, probably, if you ask me, I'm probably sitting in frustrated, like many folk in the in the chat. So I think I'm going back the way.
Yeah, I'm trying to draw. Can anyone see my drawing? It's like white. I don't know why I can't get a color here. Anyway, I'm trying to draw like a crazy scribble. I mean, for those that have experienced deep grief, I always find the stages of grief hilarious. I mean, they're wonderfully helpful in terms of like having something to anchor, but my experience of grief is so upside down and all over the place. And it's like, you know, it's like chaotic. It's not just like one to the next, and the next day I wake up feeling this. And sure, there's a pattern, there's a trend. And I think that there's something similar here to be said for that. There we go. It's pink, beautiful. But where you might also, like, part of the human experience is to not always have it so linear. This is to help us sense make around that, but doesn't mean that that's how we always show up into things. And so just acknowledging that, and also acknowledging that for colleagues and giving them grace when they're experiencing that too. Okay, I'm going to try to erase this, or how do we do? Clear it? Okay, good. Thank you, whoever helped me. Okay. Here we go. So, so here's the thing, you know, resistance is real. It's just part of the process. So as change agents, we just embrace that. It's something we should be prepared for and not feel up against a wall against or defensive about, or that maybe we need to put a little armor on. But when people say no to us, it's mostly about them, right? Because they're experiencing something. And when we say no to others, it's because we're experiencing something. So this is just an opportunity. It's an opportunity to get curious and to find out there's a reason that we're being given. What is under that reason? So I'm too busy, all right? What's going on under that? What feelings are coming up for folks that this isn't a high enough priority? Because when someone says I'm too busy, it means other things matter more to me than this, right? So what what's happening underneath? Where is it coming from? How are they feeling? What else are they holding? What is their emotional experience at the moment as well? Because usually our emotions are then giving us in our frontal cortex, they're signaling to us, come up with a reason why this doesn't feel good to me. And it usually is the order of the emotion and then the reason. So when you hear the reason, just know, oh, there's something under there that we could get into. And by inviting folks, not telling them what their emotions are, but by inviting them to reflect, that itself is an intervention for them to engage with their own feelings around the change. Now, if we get into the like, my idea is so good and here's why, and let me, go back and forth with you to tell you, why I want you to do this thing. Let me just also name that it can also happen with patients, okay, where it's like, I want you to go on a diet. And we've talked about this every year. I see you and what's going on and, or whatever it is, right? Take this medication, do this thing, and, take this vaccine, right? This defending stance doesn't really get us very far because we are hardwired to defend our own feelings. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we're just hardwired to do that. Rachel, do you have a question? Oh, but you're muted.
I'm just calling time. So
oh, thank you. I needed that. I've lost track totally. Okay, let's move along. So the idea here then is really just to get into just getting into it with everyone, to get into a sort of a jujitsu stance. So instead of sort of defending, we want to work with people's resistance. We want to use the force of that resistance together to explore it and help people for themselves determine what it is they're experiencing. So look, all of this comes, from an improvement standpoint from Deming in terms of his system of profound knowledge and thinking about psychology. And when I was invited to first reflect on this, it's because I recognized they had done so much work in the other 4 lenses and they had been neglecting the human side of change, which people were implicitly doing, but not being super explicit about. And so we just started looking across many different change methodologies and disciplines, of psychology and sociology and so on. And we were really trying to figure out, okay, what are the highest leverage tools for improvers? There's a lot of different change methods and tools out there. And that's what became then the Psychology of Change white paper, was the integration of a crosswalk of those methods as it relates to improvement. And then really keeping people at the center. So thinking about the people involved in the change as the core. And this then, and we're going to talk about agency quite a bit today, but it's really about activating people's, their ability to, or it could be an individual or a group, to choose to act with purpose, That means that there's choicefulness. You have to have the courage to get back on the bike, right? The emotional resources to choose to act in the first place, and the power, the ability to actually get on the bike and pedal. And so we need both in activating people's agency. And so the domains that we talk about, these domains here, are domains of different practices. And we're going to look at all 5 of them today. And I would just, instead of talking about them now, we'll just get into them. But I do want to just name that there are some outcome measures. By using these with an improver's mindset, we should expect a new outcome. We set an aim. Our aim is we want higher adoption rates. We want increased sustainability of change, right? And we can measure that. And so we can do that by seeing, as people pick this up, is it sustainable? Is it something that we can move through the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation curve and make this a part of how we do business? And we might also then see these secondary measures, which are associated with activating people's agency, including increased joy and feeling autonomy and control over your work, finding meaning and purpose in it. That allows people to exercise more discretionary effort. By that, we mean they show up, they volunteer to do these things, even though it may not be part of their deliverables. And we also see lower burnout and dropout as a result. So paying attention to the human side of change is really critical for great improvement. It's also critical for joy in work. So it's a very related field. Okay, so let's get into then a quick poll. We want to know from you, and I know I haven't properly introduce you to all of these, but hopefully you've had a chance to see the white paper. Which of these domains do you feel already well-versed in? You feel like I have some assets here, I know some change methods here, and I like using them. So we have some real expertise in our first domain of the day, co-design, terrific, and then co-production as well. We've got some intrinsic motivators here, and then less so in D&E. So this is the flow that we're going to go through today. So that's really great. We're going to start strong, and then we'll build off those assets as we go. Let's go to our next poll question. Our next poll question. Are you guys seeing the results? Did you see the results too, or just me? Okay, great. Oh no, they didn't see it. I think we have to share results. Anyway, just so you know, you came out high on co-design and then co-production, and then it just sort of like dwindled down all the way. That's how it looked. Now we're asking you what you're most curious about, where you feel like, ooh, this is where I'd like to play the most today. We're seeing unleashing intrinsic motivation, which is good. We're going to actually spend quite a bit of time on that and distributing power. And we're going to spend our next little section here on co-design and co-production. And we've actually shortened that time because you are trending towards what we normally see, which is that normally people feel more comfortable in those spaces and are more curious about the intrinsic motivation, distribution, and power. So nice to know that we have a pretty, you're pretty average. No, I'm kidding. All right, so let's get right into it. I'm gonna zip us along. Let me just ask you, some of you will know this, some of you will know this. If you know this, give at least a beat for others to try to answer first, okay? In the chat, what is the one word we're gonna be most focused on today in the model for improvement? This is IHI's model for improvement. You might use a different one, like lean or something, but what's the one word that we're focusing on? Oh, Kadar, have we been together before? Okay, it is we, but usually people are like, we don't know, but it's we. And here's the thing, we're always thinking about the aim and the measures and the change ideas and the tests, and let's get right to it and let's go, go, go. And we forget that there is a we that is an assumption in every single one of these questions. We don't have an aim if we don't have a we, right? We don't have measures without a we. So we want to pay very close attention to the we's in the room, starting there, right? So just really locating, like, where is this in our frameworks for improvement? It presupposes that there's anything to get done, is that we have some people that are going to work together. And that is why we have to pay such exquisite attention to those folks. So we're going to get into co-design. I'm going to zip through a little tiny bit of theory. I want you not to worry so much about it. We're going to actually use this time to look at a story and reflect together on that story. So just want to name sort of a definitional term. What we're thinking about when we think about co-design is that when folks are designed with instead of designed for or on behalf of, or to, sometimes we design things to people. And that's pretty common because we're in a service industry where we do things for others, right? And so it's acknowledging that in activating people's agency, we want to adopt an additional approach, which is a with approach, a co-design approach to joining together to design some work. So we can take the best of the assets that all the stakeholders bring, both the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders that are affected by this change, and allow them to be co-authors of what that change should look like, because they're the ones that are going to also be taking it forward, and therefore it has to be workable for them. It has to work. Now we have to recognize, of course, that we have biases in the design process, and so do others, right? And that's wonderful. It gets to our second habit of the heart around valuing otherness, right? But it also recognizes that, we may need to do a little work on acknowledging from our perch, from our experience, from our identity. This is what we often see or think or feel. And same thing with others. And so just acknowledging bias. And if you'd like to get more attuned to your own bias, you can always use the Project Implicit test online. It's shared here in the slide. And it's just important to acknowledge that as you begin the design work with your teams, is to say, here's where I'm coming from, where are you coming from, whose voices are missing that we don't have yet, because we may be already biased as to how we're developing this. And who's involved in this? Well, we have to ask who our people are then. Who are the we's that are affected by this change or this improvement? And so the second thing we can do is to map our actors. So we're not going to map them today. This is an exercise I'm inviting you to practice at another time. And you do, I think we're going to also upload it here, but it's your second material of the day. And an idea here is to just know your people. Figure out who are the constituency. The constituency are those who stand together. Constare is Latin for those who stand together, who are affected by the change. The core folks that, again, have a reason to want it to be workable to them, and drawing leadership from those core folks. And then also recognizing who else you have that are going to be strategic, especially across your system, senior leaders, external funders, who may support you, or other efforts that may be competing with yours, that you share some values with that could support your work, as well as anticipating sources of opposition along the way. So mapping actors is a great way to begin the co-design process. And then another way is to also be constantly amending your people-driven aim statement, but focusing in your aim statement on the who. Making sure that the who is front and center in terms of we are co-designing with whom, right? Who are we before we even can name what the aim might look like, and paying attention to literally naming names. You know, myself, Anna, Charlie, Benna, Rachel, Sam, you know, we are co-designing with all of you here today, this terrific session that we're going to have, hopefully terrific. And so on. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over. Those are some exercises. I know this is an area where you remember, you said this was something you're most comfortable with. That's why we're not going to get into a lot of practice on this one, because that's what we often see, but you still have an exercise to work with as we go on. You know, you can take this forward over the weekend and map out your actors and your improvement work if you like. And, but Anna, I'm going to turn it to you to share an example of what this looks like in practice.
Lovely. And if I'll tell you when I need the next slide, advancing, Kate. Okay, brilliant. So we thought we could illustrate this with a British example. And so back in 2011, I was very lucky to work with a group of people with lived experience of mental illness to think about what happened for adults once they'd had their kind of traditional kind of mental health treatments, and you know, what was around to help think about next. And there's a concept in mental health called recovery, which is a definition that's very kind of personal to everybody. You know, some people make 100% recovery from a mental illness, but for some people, it's much more like a long-term condition. And particularly for those people, it's about kind of almost redesigning or rethinking the life that you want to have as you kind of adjust to that kind of long-term condition. So we got together and we started to co-design an approach to thinking about how we value people's lived experience as much as traditional kind of mental health interventions. And we started to co-design a thing called a recovery college, where people with lived experience not only designed an educational experience, but they actually co-delivered it as well. So it stopped being traditional healthcare and it was started to be this kind of more of a community approach to supporting people after they'd had a diagnosis and treatment. And it was just an incredible experience of kind of helping people to think about what was it that our local community wanted and needed, and how do we get everybody involved in that process. And through that design, we also kind of did quite a lot of work thinking about sustainability and how could we test this, and what would we need to measure whether this was a success or not. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I wonder whether we should just show you a film that was created by people with lived experience about the Recovery College, just to give you a flavour.
When you're taken over by a mental illness, it's like you're within a big grey cloud, like that's all you can see is filtered out through this grey cloud.
Oh, sorry, me. Try again.
I felt in a kind of twilight zone. I was trying to repeat it to myself, don't let this define you, Heather, you are more than this illness. I was working as a vet and started getting unwell and got to the point where back in 2012 I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Cracking under the pressure of my first job and breaking down to the extent that I did, it's very common in our profession. The first thing from that point of hospitalisation was to get stable. The psychiatrist was brilliant, stabilised things on drugs, and I was definitely getting more functional and more normal. But I was nowhere near at the level that I'd been before. I was at the stage where I would try anything. And then I got this email through, and it was for the first recovery pilot.
One of the most powerful ways that the college works is it's run by people who've experienced mental illness. And if you haven't experienced mental illness, then it's difficult to understand how mental illness seems to invade, if you like a virus. But we who have been mentally ill understand all of those.
Keith's story of his mental illness and how unwell he'd been was a bit of a jolt to me. Here he was saying that he'd fought paranoid schizophrenia and he'd had it for years, and it wasn't just somebody lecturing me, it was this guy who'd lived through this, who'd applied these things and who'd worked hard on it, and he's an absolute success.
The Recovery College is a learning technique, which is probably different from anything that the people have experienced before. This is a model using the idea that I can learn to recover from my illness because other people have learned too.
The Recovery College teaches you to self-manage. You start taking control yourself, and it gives the power back to you because you're not a patient anymore. You're a student, which automatically takes you from somebody who's broken and needs to be doing this to get fixed to somebody who's chosen to do this. I've started a new job and it's another vet job, and I'm going back into it not as a diminished version of my old self, but as the same. I'm still capable, I can still do this, I still have the knowledge. I'm a whole person, not just a mental and physical set of illnesses.
I hope it was helpful to hear from Heather and from Keith, and using their own words to describe their own journey. What was amazing about this work was the commitment that people put into it and how much of themselves they gave to both the co-design process and the co-production process. People went from being students to then becoming experts by experience, to then becoming paid peer tutors or peer coaches. And for some people, it made a profound impact on their life. For one person in the group from the very first cohort, not being able to read, I mentioned to him the other day, he's now applying to be a teacher. We have these outcomes that mean so much. And one of the things we learned through this process, through the co-design process, was how to explore our own biases about what success looked like. So for me, You know, for me, I wanted to make sure that we could get this commissioned at the end of the project, that there was sustainability. So my bias was thinking like a person in the NHS that just wanted to make sure that we had credibility about our measurement and that would be taken seriously and that we could get that embedded. I was really challenged in my own biases by the co-delivery and co-design group to think about, well, that's not really the most important outcome for this, Anna. The most important outcome is hope that things can change. So radically changed our measurement plan. We had to scramble to think about how we measured hope. We looked and explored that, and all of our outcome measures then were designed to kind of really kind of map the recovery journey. So on the next slide, you'll see our kind of results, and they were phenomenal. You know, 94% of people in the Recovery College felt more hopeful at the end of their journey. And just to say that in terms of my own bias, when a group of people with lived experience went to present this work to the commissioners, the thought that they'd given to this was just so much more powerful than anything I could have done as a clinician working in the NHS. And the commissioners loved these results. So great that I got that kind of challenge to my own bias around it. So I think just as well, just to make sure that this doesn't all sound a bit pink and fluffy, we've also know from other kind of research studies now on recovery colleges, which have become a great success in the UK and beyond, that we now know that for every recovery college place, there's a 66% return on investment. So not only does the soft stuff add up, but also we can prove the economic impact of this work too. So I think what that shows is that when you open yourself up to co-design, when you open yourself up to, you know, co-delivery, actually you can get some stunning results. Okay, so let's move to the next slide then, Kate, shall we? So I think as well, what I've learned about the psychology of improvement is that you have to have a distributed leadership approach, passionate distributed leadership approach. So for me, that's based very much on the work of Professor Michael West, thinking about how do you make sure that everybody feels included, people's voices are heard, and that as an improver yourself, you constantly go back and challenge your own biases and the way that you're approaching improvement. Next slide, please, Kate. So in the chat, maybe it'd be lovely to hear about one or two actions that you feel that you could kind of take in the next kind of, let's say, the next 3 months that might help you in your work move towards increased co-design. So let's feel free to just put a few ideas in the chat box.
Anna, as those come in, I just wanted to notice,
Yeah.
you know, often folks can feel like things are happening to them, that they have to do this thing because they were told to do it. You know, as a patient, this also happens to us with our colleagues. And what this example so beautifully shows is not just co-design. It's co-design, but it's the interrelation across the psychology of change of co-design with distributing power to those who then they've activated their agency as patients to be a part of the solution, and sharing that power with them through authentic relationship. You know, you saw them sitting together, being honest and vulnerable and supporting each other's learning and growth. In the process, unleashing each other's intrinsic motivation through the relationships themselves and adapting their own practices and action, learning their way, you know, through these adaptive challenges together, rather than, you know, not to say that you don't also maybe need some technical support as well. Maybe some medication would also help, you know, but there's this piece here around kind of how co-design together with these other domains can really activate people's agency. It's really beautiful.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think back to 2010, 2011, when we started this work, and I think actually we're all still in touch. Our relationships are still intact a decade later. So there's something about going through that process that strengthens you as a team as well, I think, which is really important. I'm loving the things that are coming back on the chat. You know, some great examples here. I love the one, I can't remember who said it because it's flashed by on the chat too quickly, but the one that said, assume that all your assumptions are wrong. That certainly feels true to me. Thank you for that one. Great. So we know that that was a whistle-stop tour, don't we, Kate, through co-production? Kate and I have also reflected that we think that in the UK there's quite a good kind of history of co-production and co-design. We know that some of you on the course today will be experts in this. And so I know that was quick, but I think there are lots of good examples out there to draw on if you want to learn more.
Okay. All right, well, let's just keep on moving. We're going to give you all a break in about 20 minutes, so we want to get you there. Thank you, Anna. So now we're going to jump into then sort of the sister domain of co-production. You can design, but you also have to produce, right? And that happens through our relationships with each other. And the question is, what is the character of that relationship? Is it one in which we have real trust and authenticity, the ability to be psychologically safe and vulnerable with one another? What are the types of behaviors that we need to create a container for that type of relationship, right? And so we're going to look today specifically at asking open and honest questions. And Anna has kindly also agreed to lead you through this section. She and I have had the pleasure of working together on some co-production sessions in the past. So I wanted to just tap the wisdom of the assets in our room, including Anna. So Anna, back to you.
Great, lovely. Should we go to the next slide? So as we've kind of already mentioned, really, one of the key elements of co-production is treating people as assets and not burdens, and taking an appreciative approach to this, and really kind of sharing that responsibility, distributing that leadership, and ultimately sharing power and being quite explicit about that kind of power sharing. So should we move to the next slide, Kate? So a core part of that is to stop kind of telling people what to do and to really get to a point where intrinsic motivation kicks in, and we're all about what, how do we all work together to support what we want to do, and what, how do we get that to be a really genuine aim for us in the process. Next slide, please, Kate. So one of the things I've discovered through my work is that it really takes a real honesty with yourself to kind of be involved in this work. You have to have an open and honest mindset yourself. So you have to be thinking about what are your biases, how do you receive other people's intelligence. You have to notice when somebody comes up with an idea, when your immediate response is kind of a bit of a hackles at the back of your neck. You have to go away, you have to be insightful, and you have to think about your own kind of emotions and what's tapping into that, really. And we have to practice some things which we do all the time, but we quite often do them badly. So we listen all the time and we talk all the time, but quite often we don't use those two skills to kind of really help us think about creating this kind of co-production approach. So two of the things we're going to major on in the next kind of few slides is really thinking about how you ask open and honest questions, and how do you deeply listen in a way that also encourages that person to explore their own kind of inner world and their own kind of thinking. So the purpose of these questions really are to try and deepen knowledge and make explicit things that might be implicit, and bring that out into the kind of conversation, and to support another person to listen to their own kind of inner truth and wisdom. And if you get this process right, it helps us to not make an assumptions about what an answer might be. So a really good open question is when you genuinely, when you ask it, you have no clue what the answer is going to be. You're really kind of interested in what it will be, and you're not kind of closing down the kind of conversation. So we're going to get you to practice this in a minute and trying to do these two things really, really well, where you genuinely ask an open question and you genuinely deeply listen. So let's kind of give some examples, shall we, Kate, of good kind of open questions. So good ones are things like, how do you feel about this? What's your biggest hope? What's your biggest fear? When you faced a similar issue in the past, what did you learn? What would help you now? And who might support you? What's holding you back and what's urging you on? Now, you will come up with creative and inventive ones in the next exercise, but what we'd really love you to do, we're going to put you into pairs and we're going to give you 7 minutes. So And we're going to repeat what we did before, which is you're going to talk about the adaptive changes that you've had to lead over the last year. And this time, the person you're with is going to practice asking you as open questions as they can and listening to your answers. We're going to have 7 minutes each, and then we're going to switch. Okay? Is that clear for everybody? And what we really want you to pay attention to is maybe the difference from the first conversation you had compared with this conversation now, where you're going to really try and use these key skills.
So let's debrief. How was it? What was it like when you were asking open, honest questions? What was it like when you were the asker? Maybe we could hear from Dan.
Hard.
Why, Dan? Tell us. It is. Why was it hard?
Because I suppose it's holding the cognitive ability to be listening and listening with, listening to try and understand, listening to try and empathize, but also then trying to think, hey, I've got to ask a good question next. What's this really good question that I'm going to ask? So holding those two bits of my brain together was just like, was really
terrific. Difficult. That is it. I mean, it is when you're listening to understand, you probably aren't having that other bit of your brain, right? And so you might find yourself having a pause. You find yourself having a pause because you've finished listening. And then you do have to think of what the question is. So just an invitation when we ask open and honest questions to also create space for pause, right? Mm-hmm. So that you can be present and then you can also receive and come up with the next question. But you're right. And Dan, let me just ask, did you find that you wanted to fix what was being, like any problems that were being solved? I see Andrea nodding. Did you?
No, I suppose I didn't. But,
good.
Yes.
Good. And Andrea, you're nodding yes. Can you say more?
I did. I thought I was doing okay with the questioning, and then it got to the last. I went, well, I think I know what your problem is. And then I go, oh no, I'm not supposed to say that.
That's beautiful. See, I love that you just sort of toddled off the bike just a bit, and then you course corrected. Did anyone else have trouble turning off the fixer mode? Some of us do. I mean, look, we're in healthcare for a reason, right? We're here to help people. We're here to make things better. And so many of our brains are trained very much to do that. Now, others of you, like Dan, I could tell you were really listening. So great. What about when you were asked? What was it like being asked open, honest questions? Maybe Doris, could you reflect with us? What was it like when?
Oh, I love that. It helps so much structuring in this as I said, it's this amorphous blob of thing that is keeping me up, and being asked questions really helps to structure.
Yeah, it's like an invitation to be with yourself, isn't it? Yeah, and to get to the sort of your own workable way of thinking about something, which no one else can tell you. You know, there's someone who wants to know how you're going to think about it. Who else? Joanna, do you want to share what it was like to be asked open, honest questions? Thanks, Doris.
We run out of time now, so I know when to get to it. but I think the thing for me in being asked questions is that it draws out the emotions underneath either what I'm feeling or sometimes when somebody says this is what your story is, how it's making me feel, is that right? That really opens up something. Like if somebody says, what I'm feeling from your story is that there's this underlying kind of fear or anxiety, then you're like, oh yeah, there actually is. Like, I hadn't really noticed it myself, but yes, there probably is something underneath it. So I think that's really insightful and really helpful.
Terrific. Thank you, Joanna. Good. What about in your work as improvers? So how can these be, helpful to you? Do you use this as a frequent practice? And when you do, what happens? What are you using it to do? What's the application for you, for those that are using it? Maybe Katrina, could you share how you use them?
Yeah, so to me, it's something that really honed into when I was trying to be a coach. It's the whole idea that people usually know the answers the best themselves. They actually don't need us to fix it, because we don't really know their reality. We don't know ins and outs. We can give perspective and challenge some of the views, but again, the best way to do that is by actually asking these open questions. And I actually put up in the chat that, you know, it's the most empowering gift we can give. So to discover, you know, to discover what the issue might be, and then to go on to the potential solutions. People know the solutions. What they may not know is the way to do it. So this is where us as improvers come in. We help to co-design the path to the solution, because that's where the real, you know, our real role is, to contribute to finding that best path and helping people test potential ways to get to the said path. But people have the solution, and our power, our gift is to give them that power to realize that, because then people can realize that nothing stops them and they can really achieve everything that they want to.
Terrific. Thank you, Katrina. Yeah, and it goes for patients. It also goes for colleagues, right? Especially as we're working with improvement teams as well. So thank you very much for those reflections, and also the reflections coming in on chat are terrific. Thank you for those chatting in. Let me leave you with this. We're going to take a break. But before we do, when can you use open, honest questions? Maybe during your break, you can use it with someone who lives with you. When can you use open and honest questions? It may not be in your professional context. It could be in any context, right? When we get on the bike, we need to be psychologically safe. So if this is a new practice for you, there may be some places you want to try it before you get right in there. Or you may go 0 to 60. Try it with a few colleagues or others. Can you chat in? What commitment can you make to yourself? I'm asking this question not for me. I'm asking this question for you. When's your next opportunity to practice with open and honest questions? And then you can use the @Psychology4I Twitter, and you can tweet into the whole group and say, I just used open, honest questions, and here's what happened. Right? And we can keep that conversation going around your practice with open, honest questions. Okay, here we go. Fiona, thank you, with your husband. Terrific. Amanda, one-to-ones with staff and team. Great. Children, Deidre. Alan, my kids, totally. Yeah, you don't know what you're going to get back. That's the mark of a good, open, honest question. So these are good. Let's practice. Let's get on the bike and see how we do. And also just getting in that listening muscle. For some of us, that's comes second nature. For others, it's a challenge. And so, you know, practice with where you need to work. So look, we're going to take a break. I want to remind you of the Google Doc. There's some really great things coming in. We're going to try to get to some of the questions that are also coming up in the Google Doc. So if you get a chance, great, to dig back into it and share a place. It's also a place for you to kind of gather some of your thinking so far today. But we're going to take a 10-minute break. Intrinsic motivation fun we have ahead. So let's just dig in. We're going to actually be thinking a little bit about public narrative in a moment, but before we do, let's talk about what do we even mean by intrinsic motivation, and what does it even mean to unleash intrinsic motivation? So first of all, unleashing is a idea that was brought to us by Joe McCannon and Becky Margiotta, who run something called the Billions Institute. Becky actually leads Spread Academies, some of you may have participated in the UK, along with Joe. And the notion here is to get to scale, we have to orchestrate the loss of control. So that's an interesting oxymoron, orchestrating the loss of control, right? Structuring the idea that you want thousands of people taking up the improvement adoption sustainably across your organizations that you're advancing. And you may not have control of exactly how they do it. They may need to adapt it in different pockets. But so long as you're moving in the desired direction, then that's the notion of unleashing. And I find it a really wonderful term, not only in thinking about change, but also in thinking about how do you then also unleash intrinsic motivation of an individual as well as groups of many, ideally thousands of people. And intrinsic motivation comes to us from the discipline of psychology, pulling specifically from psychologists Richard Ryan and Edward Deci on doing something for the inherent satisfaction that engaging in the activity provides, right? So by participating in doing the thing itself, we are satisfied. It brings us a feeling of what we call then intrinsic motivation. And that's what we're looking for here. Now, let's compare that to extrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is sort of the, if you do this, you get that. Like maybe you'll get a reward. Or if you do this, you'll get a punishment. And so the threat of that might be an extrinsic motivator. And we use these actually a lot in the way in which we have designed our systems. And it's actually one of these organizational development quandaries, which is that this is a known body of research, and yet we still develop our organizations with rewards and incentives versus with an emphasis on unleashing people's intrinsic motivation. And we ask ourselves, why do we not get the results that we want? Well, we've set up our systems in this way, right? So any systems thinker could see that, our system is set with extrinsic motivations. And in fact, when we're dealing with adaptive challenges, okay, and largely in the health sector we are, although there's sometimes, of course, as we know, places where it's very technical. Extrinsic motivators work in a place like a factory where it's sort of people are doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over, and there's not a lot of variance in the work. But with each patient, with each improvement project, you're adapting based on the context, and you're doing a lot of learning, and that requires certain types of competencies that allow you to adapt with each and every different day and moment and situation that you're in. And so we need commitment for that. We need intrinsic motivation in those settings when we're dealing with adaptive challenges, as we've talked about earlier. So it's not that there's not a place for extrinsic motivations. It's just that they're misaligned when we're dealing with adaptive challenges. And so Deming understood this. This is something that he wrote specifically about, and he understood that fear-driven motivation, right? The extrinsic motivation of perhaps being punished by not being in compliance is not going to be as generative or sustainable as intrinsic motivators. And so a lot of the focus for Deming, even talking about joy in work itself, was around understanding what really matters to people. And we saw that taken up by Susan Levitin. We saw that taken up by Maureen Bisignano. We saw it taken up by Scotland in the What Matters to You work that they've led and brought worldwide. Many of you have been involved in on What Matters to You Day, and asking the question of others, what matters to you? And when we use that as an open, honest question and a listen for understanding, then we are also using that question as an intervention so that it can help limit the fears that people have by connecting to the things that motivate them, their values, the things that they care about. And so when we're also dealing with folks with competing priorities or who are busy, asking what matters to you type questions to unleash their intrinsic motivations to reprioritize the things that do matter to them by helping them connect with what matters and how the work that you're doing might matter to the things that they truly care about. And again, that might also mean, as we practiced in the last session, when you receive what matters to someone, thinking then strategically about, is there a connection between what I'm doing and what matters to them? Or is what I'm doing maybe going to need to change in order to meet this person's values and motivations, right? So again, being potentially changed by asking these questions. So again, this is part of the work in the framework around activating people's agency. And this, I would say, is largely about the emotional resources we need to choose to act. So this domain think is more heavily weighted around developing what we're calling courage. And it might not just be courage, it may be other emotional resources that we need to draw on for the choicefulness to act. So courage itself is in knowing ourselves. And this, again, drawing on Parker Palmer from the Center for Courage of Renewal and his definition of courage, which comes in being in relationship with ourselves. Again, why the power of open, honest questions is so important. It invites people to have some reflective space to know themselves. So eliciting what matters from others is important, but also asking yourself what matters and knowing your own self and creating the circumstances where together you can be self-knowing. And you can not only do that with one another in your co-production of relationship, but also with the reality around you, with your other coworkers, with your other patients, with a pandemic, with vaccination clinics, with being redeployed, with whatever else is happening, so that we can work sort of not in these silos of all the different things we have to do, but we can see it as a united part of who we are and how we show up to the work of improvement in particular as an integrated part of that reality. So we're going to shift now then to this practice, and we're going to invite you guys to practice this together in just a bit. This is a practice of public narrative. Don Berwick is a master at narrative. If you've ever had the pleasure of hearing him speak, he tells story after story after story to get his points across, and you find yourself really drawn in. It's no accident. It's rather intentional. And he understands how this works. He also is just inherently a gifted storyteller, but he, the idea here is not just to tell story for the sake of story. It's to tell the story to motivate others to join you in action. In action, there's something you're hoping that you'll do. So again, you might ask the question to elicit what matters to you, but now when we're sharing a story, okay, when we are sharing a story, we want to be choiceful in the stories we choose to tell so that the stories will help motivate others to join us in action. Okay, in our improvement work or whatever change effort we're taking forward. Now, this practice comes from Marshall Gans. I'm so fortunate to have had Marshall as a longtime mentor. I started working with him in 2001 when I was at Harvard Divinity School, and he's an organizer. So again, I had mentioned my background's in organizing and social movements, and that's by learning from Marshall. And this is one of the methods that he has brought to bear across many people across the world. And many of you may already be familiar with it, but this is a story of self. So our own call to leadership, a story of us, who we are together, and the choicefulness we make as a community to respond to challenge, and a story of now, the urgent challenge we face. And this pedagogy of these three stories, it comes from actually Rabbi Hillel, a first century scholar. So again, remember, I was in divinity school, so this is Marshall cross-taught this course, and so he drew on Hillel's three core questions of, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? This is not a self-interested question. This is a self-regarding question. In healthcare, we often think we're not supposed to talk about ourselves, right? That it's about the patients. And the idea here is that when we're leading a change effort, if we expect others to join us, to follow us, to participate in relationship with us, then we need to give an accounting of who we are in the work and why we care, what motivates us to do the work. So this is to help others understand who you are and your intrinsic motivations and how you bring that to the culture of the work. The second is a story of us. When I am for myself alone, what am I? And I am for myself alone, what am I? Well, to be a what instead of a who means that we're not in relationship. Remember those habits of the heart. The very first one is that we're inextricably bound to one another, and we're not going to be able to create change without one another. It's too big. Not any one of us can do it alone. So who are we together? And then the last question is, if not now, when? And this is not advice to jump off a bridge. This is the improver's mindset, that we must learn our way. We must get into a quick test of change in order to understand what is needed for change to occur. We're going to get learning from that rather than the snare of preparation, where if we plan, perhaps then someday we'll have the perfect plan, right? So it's getting right into action and to learn from that action And this is a story of really painting a picture of the nightmare that we're facing and contrasting that with the hopeful vision we have of the future. And it's in the tension between those two things where there's energy, right? And possibility. And that's the ask. That's the first thing we need to do to move from where we are to where we want to go. And that's choice. That's choice. That's choicefulness that we're asking others to exercise. And that's where commitment comes from, is that choicefulness. So we're going to invite Rachel. Woohoo! Let's do a little hand jab for Rachel. Let's see it. I don't see enough hand jabbing. James, where are your hands? There we go. All right, so Rachel's going to give us a story, and we're going to teach from Rachel's story. So listen for herself, us, and now, and then just what you experience. Just pay attention to what you notice as you listen to Rachel's story. So Rachel, turning it to you. Okay. I'm gonna actually turn off the slides so we can see just each other. Hold on. Yay. Okay.
Right. Okay. So you know me. I'm Rachel, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and I suppose why I'm drawn to psychology for improvement in particular, and I suppose improvement as well. So I hope I get through this without getting emotional. I'm a bit nervous. So it's just a couple of minutes. So my mother was a nurse and my father was a teacher. He died in his early 60s. And for the first time in my life, I saw him frightened. Frightened when we couldn't get him oxygen over a weekend. Frightened in his struggle during his final days in hospital. So this person, as an adult, we spent way less time together than we should have. And now in his final hours, I was getting closer to. Seeing his vulnerability and wanting to help, but feeling very powerless. And all I could do was rub his back, even when he was unconscious, and couldn't actually, and talk to him even when he was unconscious and couldn't reply. So I've had quite an eclectic career in the NHS with no plan as such, but seemingly drawn organically towards a space that was about making things better for patients. I managed the clinical audit department for a while, but became frustrated. Seeing junior doctors pour their heart, soul, and time into an audit, then present it to a team and wait, wondering, would a consultant pick it up and adopt the changes? Or would this audit become just another piece of work on a junior doctor's CV? And very often I saw the latter occur. So then I came across this quality improvement methodology, and it seemed to fill that gap for me. So I threw myself into this kind of QI thing. And so there I was teaching QI, coaching others, and building my own skills as an improvement advisor and coach. This QI thing was starting to get to be a bit of an emotional roller coaster, actually. And I recall one piece of QI work with one of our specialty teams. Everyone was there, from the booking clerk to the consultant, senior managers and primary care with a GP linked in. Everyone had an equal voice. And I remember the booking clerk speaking up about a problem and the consultant going to spend time with her, shadowing what she does. This experience was all about conversation, hunches, data, and learning together. It was brilliant and resulted in major reductions in outpatient delays. And I remember the consultant saying to me at the time, because he'd modeled his practice into the future, I can now sleep at night because I know that it'll no longer take 76 years to see all my new patients. But there was another piece of QI work that was quite toxic. And years ago, I met with a burnt out, frustrated clinical team, and all eyes were on them to sort out their stuff and on me to sort it. On reflection, everything about this piece of work was wrong. Immense pressure, a lack of team readiness, a task and finish type structure, absolutely no understanding of QI. And for me personally, I was on my own. I remember one idea bubbling up through the conversations and suggesting that this might be tested. And the lead just stating, no worries, I'll just tell them to do it. Or another, I just need the data to tell me we need a new consultant. I had no voice and I felt powerless. And for the first time in my life, I was full of anxiety, self-doubt. I couldn't sleep. My performance was dipping. I was forgetting things and questioning myself constantly. And I was isolating myself from the very people who could help me. And somebody told me something that I'll never forget. It's not about you or the team. It's about the system itself. And in a blinding flash of the obvious, that I was too close to see, the relationship between the system and people's psychology. So over the years, as I became quite an experienced improver, and I was teaching many other fledgling improvers, I began to feel quite protective of them, going out into the organization and being that lone voice, as frustrated as I was and sometimes feeling inadequate. I wanted them to know that much of the frustration is about the system, but that the solution to much of this is about the people. That we need to create a soil that enables people to engage and to be safe and supported and confident and connected. So as I started to connect with others with similar thoughts, people like you guys, I realized that psychology for improvement is not just about protection. It's about other words like safety, ownership, leadership, creativity, locus of control, cognitive bias, resilience, situational humility, mindset, relationships, even identity, and the list goes on. So I like to think of improvement science as a magpie science, and the next place that it needs to steal shamelessly from, that I need to steal shamelessly from, is psychology. And so this is an invite to you on this call today to reflect on your own psychology of change and on what led you to improvement in the first place. I invite you to share your stories, and I'll allow others to share in your experiences so that together we can unleash our own and one another's motivations and activate each other's agency around the human side of change. So this is the invitation. Will you join me?
Yay! Thank you, Rachel. I will join you. I will join you. If you'll join Rachel, you can applaud or give us a reaction. All right. Seeing lots of hearts and thumbs up and applause for you. Thank you, Rachel, for your courage to share with us today. So we're going to spend some time reflecting with Rachel on her story. So I'm going to pull the slides back up. And first, I want to just invite folks, let's go back to Marshall for a second. Where did you hear a story of self? Where did you hear Rachel's story of self? Where did you hear her own motivations to do the work that she does? Yeah, thanks, Lou. Lou, do you want to unmute yourself and share a little bit about what you heard there?
I think it was a really powerful story, and lots of credit to Rachel for sharing that, because it must have been very difficult. I think a lot of us, we're driven by things that happen to us on a personal level that we experience ourselves, and it's how we relate that into something that matters to other people. And we, as a purpose in work terms, we're all here to improve patient experience and improve staff well-being and all of those things. But actually, when we've got that personal experience and that bit where it touches you in your heart, I think that is what is the biggest driving force.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. I want to pay attention to something here. There's in each one of these stories a structure. And I want to tease apart that structure. So as you're thinking about your own story, you might also think about borrowing from the structure. The structure is challenge, choice, and outcome. So when we heard, Rachel, your story of self, about your mom being a nurse, your dad being a teacher, and that was actually that was a signal to us. I mean, nurse and teacher, whoa, that is a powerful combination about people that care for others and invest in enabling others. So we have your dad's challenge around, needing oxygen, around entering this final phase of his life and his illness. And we have choicefulness, your choicefulness about what to do to be there with your dad. And what do we know about the choices that Rachel made? What choices did she make? Anybody? Yeah, Sarah, what actions did she take? Do you remember?
That very sort of conscious decision that audit was one thing, but it needed something else as well. And maybe she could learn and develop and then support others to take that data and do something with it.
Yes, that is a choice that she does make. You're absolutely right. And that is in response to the challenge of wanting to find a way to help people, right? She's extremely choiceful. But even before that, when she was sharing about her own experience with her dad, she makes a choice, and Deidre wrote in the chat, to touch and to talk to him. Now, she didn't say, I was there. Now, Becky, you wrote to be there and support her dad. Now, I want to just pay attention to something. She could have said that. I was there and I supported him at that time. What would we have not experienced as the listener? What do you see in your mind's eye when you hear her say, I rubbed his back, I spoke with him even when he couldn't respond? Suddenly you're in the room as the listener. So paying attention to the craft, okay, the craft of story is really important. She's using images that are a show, it's not a tell. We know that she's supporting him. We know that she's, present to him, but she doesn't have to say that. She shows us, and then we can experience it as the protagonist. This is what movies do. This is what good books do. When you are in a story and you are experiencing it so that you feel something. And so when we tell stories, we want to think about, how do I show people what I experienced rather than tell them, so that I can bring them into that moment with me. And we call those choice points, or moments that we want to locate in our own stories, where we encounter challenge and we make a choice, and we want to show that choice. And we know the outcome, right? So the outcome is the type of final experience that Rachel had with her father, which tells us something about her values. What do we know about Rachel? What do we know about who she is as a human being? Is it really hard to be with people when they're dying? Is it courageous to live into the scariness of that? Do we know that there's a forceful loyalty of being present to someone who's suffering? Right? So we're hearing from that choice a lot of values about who Rachel is as a leader, and we're immediately having a feeling about, do we want to be with this person? Is she the kind of person who makes choices that we like, who has values that we share? Because guess where we learn about our values? Through our choices. Through our choices. There's this really cool piece of work, I shouldn't get into it, but I'm going to get into it, which is around damaged amygdalas, right? So the amygdala does many things. It's sort of the fright, flee, fight, freeze, all, center, responding to threat, but it's also an emotional center. And so for people that have damaged amygdalas, what can't they do? I mean, get this. See if you can guess. People with damaged amygdalas, what can't they do? Yeah, you would think empathize or feel. I mean, it's sort of like the natural idea. They can't choose. They can't choose. Why? Because if you can't feel, you have no emotional center for what you're going to choose to do. You don't go to reason first. We think it's all about reasons. No. It's emotions. We have an emotional experience, and then we come up with the reasons. So choices are really important. And that's what we want to get to in the structure of story. Now, Rachel, let's go back to your story for just a second. You also had some lovely us's. They were rather implicit. Did anyone pick up on these? They might have, maybe if we were coaching you, Rachel, we might say, ooh, can we connect the dots even a little more explicitly to who we are together? But did you feel some implicit usness in the stories? Where was that usness? Yeah, okay, here we go. The junior docs, the shared team experiences, the, yeah, in the end, coming back to us. Yeah, so she had this experience of, first of all, you know, another challenge, which is finding her way, you know, through life into these audits, which were not giving her the agency that she wanted. That was a challenge. So she made a new choice. She was introduced to QI, picked right up on it, consistent with her values, making things better for others, and saw it as an antidote, right? And then she paints this picture of the dream, and we can see ourselves on that team with her, right? We can see ourselves on that team. And she contrasts that. Now, this is where we're in it, both in us and in now. So she paints a picture of a dream. The vision we could live towards is the improvement team that's like crushing it, right? But she also paints a picture of, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes an improvement piece of work, it is a nightmare. And we do not have the conditions in place to enable ourselves to work together effectively to get to change. And so that contrast also brings us to the now. So we can see ourselves in that work with her. We're also seeing sort of what we want to move towards, but we sometimes encounter. And one choice that she gives us is psychology of change as a way in which to deepen our understanding in order to enable teams to work together more effectively, and then invites us in this moment. What's the first step? So what's the invitation she gives us? It's the first step we can take together. What's her ask of you? Yeah, share your stories, right? So, you know, the first step isn't like, go back out there and work with your team in this new way and like, you know, make the dream team happen and go, go, go. It's not this like pie in the sky. It's this. So to do that, here's the first thing we can do together. It's really concrete. It's something doable and actionable that we can do. And that activates our agency to get on that bike, to get started together, right? And it's concrete and it's happening now. And either we felt something about the story and we want to join her, or we don't. So we know if it worked. We know if it worked because it's located in something clear. So we're going to invite you now to practice that, right? Now you don't have to do all of it. We're going to take you off the hook. You don't have to do the self, us, and now. We're going to just focus on the story of self. Just your own call to leadership and improvement work. Where does it come from? Where does it come from? And how might you locate that? Not in your life story, not in your whole life story, in a moment. And how might you flesh out that moment to help us experience the challenge you faced through images and sounds and bringing us into a room or into a space with you? And what happened in that space? What choices did you make, or what did you see someone who was a role model to you make? And when we get into our space together, we're going to be listening for some things. Specifically, that challenge choice outcome structure is what I really want to invite you to focus on. If there's only one thing that you feel you can, I can't multitask very well. So I sometimes like it when it's sort of like, here's the one thing I can do. But when you're listening to each other, you might also be listening to just noticing yourself when you feel connected in the story, and to give someone that feedback. I felt really connected when you said X, Y, or Z, so that they can see when they were most effective. And also pay attention to what values the choices that people make demonstrate about who they are. Demonstrate about who they are. Don't worry so much about making asks of each other and so on. We're really just going to focus on that first piece of your own work. So there's a worksheet. I think Sam has also put it in the chat, and it gives you a chance to, thank you, Sam, just reflect. So you're going to have 5 minutes now of quiet reflection, and then we'll get you into breakouts. But let's just work together quietly for 5 minutes. All righty. That probably went fast for many of you. Don't worry about it. Remember, we're getting on the bike, and this is a safe place to play. And we're going to receive each other with grace and encouragement to our friends in just a moment. The goal in this breakout is that everybody gets a turn. That's the #1 goal for this breakout. You don't want anyone to not have a chance to share their story. Really want to honor every single person in the ability to do that. So one person we invite in your breakout, you're going to be in a triad, will be the timekeeper. What does it take to be a timekeeper? A clock. Somebody got to have a clock. And so one person needs to do that. Please respect each other's time. You may not have finished your story and 5 minutes will be over. And it's okay. You can just say, and I'm going to just stop there. so that we can really honor each other. And thank you, for trying. And that might also be a point of feedback for you. It's like, wow, that took me 5 minutes. How could I break that into 3, right? Like challenge ourselves. Like how could we, get our story across in a short period? So this is our agenda. You'll each have 5 minutes to share. And if you do finish early, if you're efficient with your time, then reflect on the learning. What was it like to hear each other's stories? Or what did you love about each other's stories? Or what's one thing you might invite someone to reflect further on that you're still curious about in their story, and so on. Okay. So I'll put this into the chat, but I do want to just get it to you now, and Sam will get you in your breakouts. Hope that was a fun and meaningful exercise for you and your colleagues. Let's reflect a little bit about it. We have about 5 minutes, and then we're gonna shift into, we'll shift when we shift. So what was it like to receive other people's stories? What was it like to receive them? What did you notice?
I felt honored.
Oh, Anna, say more.
I think when people get a chance to tell you who they are, I think it's an honor to hear what they've chosen to reveal.
Yeah, what a gift, right? What a gift. And also eliciting that what matters to you question that sort of formulates the story of self. In those co-production conversations as an open, honest question, you're about to receive a gift. Woo! And also share your gift. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you. What else did folks notice receiving stories?
I find it quite powerful to listen to hear that person's story, to think about where they came from. So yeah, as well as it being a gift, just the power of it.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah. Any other reflections?
I think it was amazing that despite all this being by video, watching Anna talk was amazing, because the words that she said and her gestures were just, and I don't know if it's because we're on video, we have to be more acutely aware of the person, but it was amazing watching her talk, but also her gestures and listening to the story at the same time. It made it more real.
Thank you. I have to tell you, the technology relationship here with getting to know folks. Before we even had these platforms, we had something called the telephone. Do you remember that? I'll tell you, it is a wonderful tool, because guess what you don't have on the telephone? 1,000 different alerts and distractions on your screen. So it is a wonderful tool if you can't be with someone, to get to know them and to listen and to receive. And sometimes even, it's wonderful to have the nonverbal cues. Boy, is that nice. But also just, you can tell when people are showing up with you or not, we all know when people are being authentic. Sort of the bullshit test, really, isn't it? So, okay, well, thank you. So, and what about when you shared your story? What did you notice in yourself when you were sharing your story? Did it take a little courage? Yeah.
Hey there, can I?
Yeah, Jonathan, please.
So it's more that it's important to have the combination of the two. So the comments people had around listening and how it's an honor, I completely agree with, and it can almost become addictive, particularly if you're a QI person. Always getting into listening the whole time, but so important to get involved. That life's about participation. So what was great about that exercise is that having the courage to then expose yourself. In my group, someone before me did a beautiful and concise and really personal story that was neat, and I'm like, blimey, my one's a mess. But once I got into it, it felt good. And out of the 3, we had 3 very different stories, and together they were much more powerful.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Now we're talking about getting also into application, right? So let's do that. Let's just take it there. Think about that. How do you apply narrative to your work? You're starting to take us there, Jonathan. Is, part of it is listening through the open question of and eliciting what matters to you and hearing stories, but then as you're listening, connecting it to your own stories, right? And saying, through story, we have shared values based on who you are. And we have 3 totally different stories, but look at the shared values about who we are together and the usness of that. That starts to create an us, right? That can then activate the group's agency to act by hearing stories. So what are some places you could play with story? What do you see the possibilities? In your work life, in your improvement work, in your extracurriculars?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really captivated by the point you made almost in passing earlier, which is that in the stories, you learn what matters to the person who's telling that story. So to answer the question, what matters to me, sometimes I really don't know what matters to me, but the story almost gives it away, both to myself and to the listeners.
Isn't that lovely? Thank you, Hesham. What do folks think about where you might use some story?
Can I come in?
Yes, please. Hi, Kedar.
Yeah, thanks. What I feel is when you sit together on an improvement project discussing, when you feel that people are not coming up, people are keeping silent a little bit, people not getting involved. So in that situation, probably we can share our story, ask some explicit question, ask them to narrate their own stories, get them talking, and then probably you'll find the total environment gets changed. This is what I have experienced.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kedar. So it's sort of modeling the psychological safety of sharing story. Let's say it's in a huddle, right, with your team or a little team meeting. And it's starting with a sharing of story and then an invitation. So it's modeling what we hope we want others to do and then invite others to share. You know, some teams I work with, they use it at the start of every meeting. They invite a different team member to share around what matters to them today. And it could change, but it's a source of getting people to first connect to the values about why they're doing the thing that they're doing together in our improvement work. And we can do, of course, in one-to-one meetings. We can do it in action events. So the ways in which you design how to like bring your work to scale as you're, for example, maybe doing a training and you invite people in the first 5 minutes to turn to their partner and share, why are they here today? Why does this matter to them? And to get to some authentic exchange around motivations, right? So we can build this into everything we're doing. It just takes sort of a thread. It's like being a master, weaver and threading it in to everything we do to bring some motivation into the conversations, into the spaces, into the improvement work. Even when we're doing, the study part of a plan to study act cycle, is we're asking ourselves, now, why does this matter, right? Why does this matter to us? And dropping into that as a place to continue to motivate the commitment around the action. So thank you. Good. So an invitation for you to think about when you could work on either eliciting or sharing story in your improvement work and or just to get back on the bike and practice with maybe someone you're working with outside of work, maybe something else that matters to you that you're leading or doing, participating in as a place to play with story. I think with that, I'm going to turn it. I'm way over time. Sorry about that. I know you guys want to get to lunch. You're going to get the full 30 minutes. It's not going anywhere. You will still get it. We have a little slush time this afternoon. I know some of you had to also leave because you had other commitments at 12:30. But I want to turn it over for those who are with us to just, we're going to kind of close out the morning. I'm going to invite Benna and Charlie to lead us through a little reflection time together.
Charlie, do you want to start or would you like me to?
Thanks, Benna. Thanks, Kate. I just want to say, just brilliant to be here, and just it feels like there's a lot to chew on, and I think Benna, 10 minutes we're not gonna cover everything. I suppose we just think about what's come up for us this morning, and perhaps from what we've heard, where do you think is a good place to start?
Yeah, no, I think I've been really struck by. I know we were concerned, all of us, as a team in advance, that. What would it feel like all being virtual and how connected we want this to feel? And I've been so struck by how present everyone has felt. And also by our collective humanity. It kind of feels like we have shown up with our whole selves, and that there's been a huge amount of humanity in this session so far. I was really struck by when people were sharing the changes they've been through this last year, and how, you know, it felt like quite an intimate sharing in terms of kind of people, you know, really thinking about how this had impacted in so many ways. And there's something about that showing up as human that feels like it has an impact on the whole session. So I've been very struck by how it's felt.
It almost kind of becomes a cumulative thing, doesn't it, as well? And when, like we've just heard in the last piece from Kate, when someone models it, you kind of respond yourself, and it becomes a kind of virtuous cycle of sharing more. Yeah. I was really struck by that too, just the level of openness. And I was thinking, gosh, do these people do this in their day jobs, or is there something about this space that we've kind of, you know, Kate and we've created together that's enabling that? And because I was wondering about some theme around, Jonathan mentioned mess just there, and I think Joanne this morning mentioned about a scribble, and Hesham talked about a roller coaster, and there was that kind of realness of real life. And then there was also this sense of structure. I think Jude mentioned structure, and Doris talked about structure, and in Rachel's story, there was this sense of challenge, choice, outcome. There was a structure to it. So I was left thinking something about how does structure and real life kind of support each other.
Yeah. And also how rarely we create spaces for this stuff, for the kind of messy human side of things. And I think you're right, that kind of counterbalance between the messy human stuff and that fear. I think Simon said something about, after listening to Rachel's story, that sense of the raw emotion, and that sometimes that can make us feel quite vulnerable, and it might be stuff that we kind of avoid or shy away from. But you know, us being human, you know, this is not a new pandemic thing. I know it's been a tough year for lots of us, but actually we've always had all of this stuff going on, and how we find ways with the people that we're working with of really connecting on a human level, because great stuff kind of happens when we do that. So it's how we might find ways, and that those might be quite structured ways, but ways of making sure we share perhaps more deeply than we've been accustomed to doing.
Can I pick up on something there, Benna, because that's reminded me something Seema said. I don't know if Seema's still here or if she's gone away, but Seema used the word hope and the word discovery. And I think it was discovery. It was after Rachel did her story. It was after the open questions bit, and this sense of being willing to go into a place where you don't know what the other person's going to say, but you've got this spirit of discovery. And that just seemed such a kind of theme of the morning, just a kind of willingness to go into a space and kind of see what happens and go with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Seema, are you there? Do you want to chip in on that, Seema? Are you able to comment further on what you meant by discovery? Maybe she's gone already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think just in that spirit, somebody in the last session, I think, was just the most recent session, was talking about that giving of ourselves and the courage. We're very good at enabling, aren't we? We're very good at sort of, you know, making it happen for other people. That point about, you know, we're there to help and to kind of, you know, but actually that helping sometimes involves that giving of ourselves and you know, and having the courage to do that, because it might make us feel emotional. It might be difficult. So no, that feels really important. I don't know if anybody wants to just offer up, join us in a quick reflection on some of those themes.
I think Benna and Charlie, you just captured it really brilliantly, and something about just how everyone's just turned up and contributed, and that we've been bigger than our individual selves today. There's something about the collective conversations that we've had. So I think the two are really nicely. So thank you for doing that.
Laura,
Thank you, Anna. And I think, who was that, Kate? Sorry.
Oh, I thought I saw Laura and Hannah's hands up.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thank you. It was beautiful. I'm just thinking back full circle to the start of the day when I mentioned compassion practices and work that Benna, Charlie and myself have been involved in. And, you know, some of the core principles of that is, you know, listening with an open mind, quiet heart, and appreciating from the heart. And I think what we've done today is to use some of those principles from compassion practices and creating safe spaces for us all to be human together. And that inner work and joint work together has been beautifully role modelled, and I think the facilitation of the space has enabled that. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Hannah, did you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I was just mirroring that a bit, but just to say thank you. I think it's a testament for how it's been facilitated, and the scene that was set in the morning, that people have felt able to be quite so open and engaged. I think I was a little bit apprehensive before because I haven't really been on one of these sessions before, and I often think, well, I haven't really been on a Zoom that's been quite as engaged in this, so it's just a thank you, really.
Thank you.
That seems like a good note to end on, Bennett.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. No, thank you. That's really lovely. And if we do nothing else, kind of reinventing the space that is Zoom would be an amazing thing to get out of today.
Welcome back from your lunch. Hope you got to move your body and nourish it and take a little mental break. Excited to dig into our fun together this afternoon. We are going to shift gears now and talk about power. And the idea here when we're talking about distributing power is that what we're hoping to do to build some power is to harness the assets that everyone brings and to contribute their unique assets to our improvement work by sharing power with them. So we're going to look at a couple practices in a little while, but what we wanted to do is just get you right into breakouts to start talking about and unpacking power. So these are the questions that we're going to invite you to reflect on. And the first is just how you experience power, in your day-to-day, whether it's an experience of power over, perhaps there's someone who you experience as having power over you, or an experience of power with, of joining with others, again, to contribute your unique resources to achieve a shared purpose and build new power that didn't exist prior. Or that you live into every day, given the work that you do with others. And you might also notice your own self in how you contribute to power over dynamics and how you contribute to power with dynamics. So we'll invite you to reflect on that. And we're going to give you about 5 minutes in, I believe, what did we say? Groups of 10 minutes in groups of 3. So we'll just get right into it. Let's hear what was coming up for folks. What bubbled up? Let's hear from someone we didn't hear from this morning.
I don't mind speaking.
Let's do it.
In our group, just to keep things very general, there was a common experience of being de-empowered and just how awful that can make an employee feel. And that doesn't get the best out of people. And it can culminate, I'm thinking quite often will culminate in people wanting to leave the organisation, which is sad because you're losing skills, you're losing good people.
What is happening when you're, what is actually happening to you when you're disempowered?
When you, yeah.
And for those who feel disempowered, what is actually happening to you when you're disempowered?
You feel unhappy.
You feel
and
sad.
why?
What's happening?
It knocks your self-confidence and your self-esteem.
So I hear helplessness.
It makes you doubt yourself, makes you doubt your skills and abilities.
Yep.
And it leads to resentment.
Resentment.
Does not lead to good working relationships.
No. And let me ask the question a little bit differently. So this is what it results in. What is happening that causes that result? What are the behaviors that you're encountering from others that make you feel disempowered? What are they doing? Yep, chip in. Go ahead.
It's like a tokenism. The leaders behaving in a manner of tokenism, just Theoretically giving you the power, but practically not allowing to work.
Okay, so sometimes there's an experience, thank you, of tokenism. Sorry, I can't catch your name because it says iPhone. What was your name?
Oh, Kedar.
Kedar. Oh, there you are again. Okay, you're on the iPhone. So this idea of feeling tokenized, thank you for sharing that. What else is happening? Why am I asking you what's happening? Because there are actual behaviors that lead to this experience. And it's important to recognize what those behaviors are, and also sometimes to recognize them in ourselves, right? What else happens when we disempower or others disempower? Go ahead, Katrina.
Oh, crap. You could do me a favor, could you? I left my phone in there. Would you just be able to run and get it for me?
That's
go ahead, Katrina.
I think when it comes to behaviors, it has the potential to go to the extremes such as anxiety, depression, disengaging in meetings, increased sickness absence, increased conflict with other members of the organization, lack of productivity, and it just snowballs, and then people start to leave.
And sorry, I must not be asking the question very effectively. These are the outcomes. So this is how we feel when we're disempowered. But what is causing that? What are the behaviors that others are exercising that results in those feelings?
We're not being valued.
Not being valued. And how is that being shown?
That your expertise or where you feel your strengths are just not being utilized, and you end up feeling that you're not contributing anything. So
okay, good.
It's actually funny because one of the first things I asked when you broke us into the groups, one of the first things I asked Dan is, what actually is power in the first place in a workplace? And it's to me, one of the, and I think that possibly answers your question a little bit, is the ability to make decisions autonomously and also influence the decisions. And when there is lack of power, when the power is being taken away from us, we suddenly start being treated like we're not capable of manage ourselves, manage our time, and like our contribution isn't valued.
Yep, thank you, Katrina. And I'm seeing also your colleagues, finally, I'm getting into the chat and everyone's answering this question beautifully. Sorry, everybody, I totally missed the chat. So feeling sidelined, overlooked, undermined, being micromanaged, communications of microaggressions, resulting in obviously a lack of trust, feeling belittled, dismissed, discounted. So these are behaviors that result in feelings of disempowerment. And I appreciate, Katrina, you're grounding us in a notion of what power is. We're going to come back to that notion, but since you've brought it to us, I just want to note the ability to achieve purpose, right? You said the ability to achieve purpose is part of power. And we're going to talk about power as a relationship. One thing that happens when we experience a power over a situation, especially when it's over us, in addition to what you've named in the chat, is that somebody has the decision-making authority. And often we confuse decision-making authority with power. And what I invite you to consider is that decision-making authority is an asset. It's an asset. It's something a resource that different people have. And frankly, we all have it, right? We all have choicefulness. We might not like some of the choices we have, like leaving, but we have it, right? And so just to notice that power isn't necessarily so much a thing like a decision-making authority, that's an asset that you can contribute to an effort, or you can misuse it as you've described and result in the disempowerment within relationships. And we're going to talk a little bit about the relational nature in a bit, so we'll come back to that. What about power with? When do you experience power with? What's happening? Let's see, who hasn't shared yet? How about Chris Atkin? Nice to see you, Chris.
Hi there. Well, we had a good conversation about what we really mean by power to start with, and you know, we can tend to start at a negative place, but actually you can think of it in a much more enabling way, which is, I guess, your power with, you know, and your capacity to kind of, you know, influence and direct with people. And sometimes it comes down to giving permission to do something where actually maybe the permission was never taken away in the first place, but just because of the situation we're in, you know, it needs someone. The person I was working with, you know, we're both in a kind of sort of facilitative OD type role. And sometimes, you know, teams might feel we have the power, but in actually we're there kind of creating the safe space, which might be defined as power, and enabling them to take the ownership and the power to enact whatever it is they're needing to do. So it needn't be a kind of negative thing if we think about power with. Sometimes it can take courage to do that, but so we kind of had a really good conversation about how it can be a sort of enabling force. And we were talking about superpowers earlier, which were all very kind of positive and, you know, nice. So we had a kind of more positive conversation about opportunities that power can give for good.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I had a lovely conversation with Camille. And Camille, do you want to share a little bit about what power with is for you?
I'm just flagging as well while Camille unmutes that Colin has put his hand up.
Oh,
so you might want to bring him in
okay, sure.
too in a moment.
Colin, to you after Camille.
Hiya, we were talking about how power with, I mean, I was helped by Kate in getting the definition, but how power with is the community, is doing it with others, and that can create power.
Yeah, I found it so revealing when Camille just, you know, off the cuff said, I find power from people who are warm and where I feel I can be myself. I feel empowered. And even just today, she was reflecting on the group and how she feels empowered in this community. And so thinking about the relational nature of power, and I'm loving what's coming in through the chat too. We'll come back to that in just a second. Colin, go right ahead.
Thank you. I was reflecting on my experiences of sort of seeding power, if you like, or encouraging co-production and the management of power within my own team, and how to when people keep bringing issues back to me for guidance, how I kind of don't reject them, but gently push them back for them to seed their own kind of power and agency in those decision makings, and hold them in that safe space to allow them to go off and do, as it were. So that's sort of closer working relationships with team, but also when I first came to the trust, how to empower colleagues called improvement agents, where we recruited them on a sort of strategic basis for them to show their initiative. And yet one of the barriers we found with that was that their line managers, we hadn't equipped their line managers to give up that power over them, to enable them to exercise their agency and power and choices. And so it's a very complex web that you have to prepare the ground well for.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. In fact, there's a question here too about empowering from Hesham around, do you have to have a power imbalance in order to seed it? I think maybe for seeding, but for building power with, you could certainly be on an equal status contract. And that's sort of the idea, is that building power with, even if you come at different levels of seniority in an organization, you're acknowledging that you're going to need everyone's unique assets to create change. And so it may mean that if you're structurally, it can structurally be within the organization, but also organizations are based on structural histories of many isms. So we bring, race and gender and, education and income ability and many social determinants into who's in our organization playing what roles and who already has the power, and that's baked in. And so we have to also acknowledge that you know, that there are that we have a responsibility in our sharing of power to address some of those structural imbalances in the ways in which we work with one another. And we can do that on our teams. In fact, that is empowering. That is a choice that we can make, at least in terms of our own choices and our own sphere of influence. It may not be we can control what others choose to do, but it is part of at least our own integrity. So let's shift from this. There's some wonderful things coming up in the chat about what power with looks like. And I just want to say yes, yes, and yes, and to what you've shared. And thank you all for just this like super rich chat that we've had today in the chat. Cannot wait to download it at the end of the day and really sink in and also respond to some of the questions that I know we won't get to address today. So just so you know, if there are questions we don't get to address, I will commit to you to working with the team to respond to them or to stay at the end and respond to them. So let's move along. We're going to look at a couple of different power structures and reflect on power as we structure it in our work. And the first is the Lone Ranger, or the diva model of leadership, or the hero model of leadership, where we find ourselves as the dot in the center, the dot in the center. And I want to invite you, have you ever felt this way? Anybody ever felt like the dot in the center?
You mean the godlike experience?
Yeah, that one, Colin. Where you have the great idea, it's your improvement effort. You know, it's kind of hard to get to those arrows on the side, right? They like can't find their way into you. Yeah, and maybe also you've been one of those arrows, and you've been trying to help somebody who's holding all of it and doesn't really want you to help, even though they say they do. So what's that experience like if you're the dot or you're one of those arrows? Suzanne, I saw you nodding. Do you want to take a crack? Yeah.
No, thank you. Sorry. I think I find it quite frustrating because I think there are things that can be done, and yeah, and it's just a bit disheartening, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It's really frustrating. And what if you're that dot in the center, Suzanne?
It's kind of intoxicating, to be honest, but at the same time, I recognize that it's probably, I try and reach out, but I think there is a lot of control that comes with that feels very comfortable. But it can be a scary place to be too.
Yeah, yes, it can be scary. Why can it be scary?
Ali's just raised their hand.
Oh yeah, Ali, please chime in. Thanks, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I have been that dot, and I would echo everything that Suzanne's just said. It can be intoxicating, but really bloody scary as well when you're stuck in the middle. And I really quickly realised that I couldn't just do it all, but then pulling those arrows towards me so that I could hand it over took a vast amount of effort and energy. And don't get me wrong, it was still incredibly exciting, and I was getting such a buzz out of it, kind of taking these people with me on this crazy journey, which was amazing. But the pressure of it, I lost a lot of sleep, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it can lead to burnout. It certainly doesn't lead to outcomes, right? We're going to need other people because we have big changes in mind, right? Like, we're not going to do it alone. There's a reason why it hasn't happened yet. We're thinking about that adoption, Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation curve, and so this model will not work for that, right? Colin, did you want to chime in too?
Yes, I was just reflecting on how that culturally the system, as you say, is baked in for lines of accountability, isn't it? Particularly with the way the system works, is people in management roles want a clear line of accountability for when things don't go right, and therefore to diffuse power, to cede power and agency and distribute it. It's quite an anathema to quite a number of people still, because it messes with their head about where will the buck stop.
Yeah, so let's get into that next slide, which is exactly that line authority, which I know you're very familiar with. But what are the good things about this one? There are some good ones. Who haven't we heard from? How about Amanda?
I knew you were going to pick me, Kate.
We have to disclose, Amanda. Amanda and I work together on Joy and Work. Amanda and Simon and the whole NHS Lothian team, many of whom are here today. And it's just so fun working with all of you. But anyway, Amanda, I've been trying not to pick on you all day.
I was going to come to it. So yeah, as somebody who struggles not to be a dot and hold all of that kind of power and control, and it is the control, because as Ali said, the energy it takes to distribute everything to all of those dots and then keep an eye on it and support the arrows is that can be really overwhelming. The hierarchy, I'm not so keen. I hope the team that are with me today will see that I don't operate in that way. With the team, I cede power, hopefully. They can tell me if I don't. You know, we all have our moments. I kind of put in the chat, you know, and if I start to get frustrated or I think there's a risk to something being delivered that I'm accountable for, then my critical parent can raise up and I hear those things in my head, like, can you just do it? But hopefully they don't come out of my mouth because I'm kind of very aware of that. Hierarchy is quite understandable, isn't it? It creates clarity. In terms of, you know, a structure and an order. And I think we had some reports during COVID that the chain of command was really clear in terms of where decisions were made. It was simplified, so that hierarchy, you know, 2 of those arms were just stripped out and there was just a vertical. I suppose that can feel quite safe for people, that they're sheltered in that hierarchy. And less safe at the top because you have the control over everything underneath. And that's quite a big job.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And I see some other hands up. I want to get to you. I also want to acknowledge that I really have a sincere wish to hear from everybody here today. And I know that some of you don't have your cameras on, but I'm going to start calling on you and see if you're really there. Which is okay if you need to have your camera off, but I just mean to say, we still want to hear your voice. So if you don't mind, Jude and Colin and Kate, I'm going to just hold with you for a second and let's call on Emma Scott. Emma, are you with us? We'd love to hear from you if you are. Or Seema, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Seema.
Okay. Hello.
Hi. I mean, I'm just kind of pulling this out for you, but what are the hard parts of hierarchy? What are the things that don't work in hierarchy?
For me, that sort of mechanistic way of organizing has a place. It does. I think we do need to acknowledge that, and perhaps in times of real emergency, when there's something that needs to be, there's a purpose that needs to be addressed really quickly, then that can be the only way, potentially, some might argue. But I think that it's something that you have to use for a very limited period of time, because people need space to be creative, and the purpose of whatever we're trying to achieve also needs that creativity, because when you're dealing with complexity, this sort of mechanistic, hierarchical way of organizing won't solve the problems. And so when you are in that complex, messy space, it's really important to have a more fluid, sometimes messier approach, and to have the courage to deal with that mess, and courage as leaders, I guess, to deal with that.
Thank you, Seema. Yeah, I mean, it really is. When we talked about our intrinsic motivations, when you look at what keeps people really happy in their work, it is learning, So having feedback loops, which this doesn't necessarily have if the arrows are all pointing down, right? So you have some ways in which to get feedback as to whether it's working or not. It's competency, so feeling that your ability to contribute something that you're good at. And we talked a little bit about not feeling valued or being, not feeling that you're living into your competent self. And then the last is your autonomy and control, right? So if everyone's telling you what to do, you have very little of that. So what I appreciate, Seema, about your acknowledgement is that you might need more than one structure at different times. And part of the agility in adaptive leadership is knowing what you need, when you need it, and how to move from, crisis situation, let's get it under control. And then let's go back to a more distributed leadership structure where we are enabling people in their own locus of influence to exercise their own good judgment, rather than continuing to control and tell them what to do. And Amanda's great points around, often when we're doing that, we're either living into the habit of our system, or we're living into our fear around our own control and what other people's actions will reflect back on us. And so part of our work later will be to talk more about that fear. But let's go to this one. So is anyone familiar with looking at everyone's a leader? Anybody ever participate in a team like this? This is pretty common in coalition work, where you get folks that want to come together because they want to see what each other's doing, but there's not really a shared purpose. So then they just go back away. But then it's like they keep coming together, but they don't know why they come together, except to kind of check each other out. And sometimes this happens in improvement projects where you have folks that are like, well, I'm with you, but we really haven't established a shared purpose around what it is we're doing together. And so nothing really ever gets done, right? So that's the everyone's a leader, but nobody's a leader because everyone's a leader model. So let's keep moving. We're going to get into an exercise now. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And what I want to invite you to do in the exercise is the very first step of the exercise. So Sam will put it in here. It's the distributed leadership structures exercise. Thank you, Sam. And I want you just to draw how you are experiencing, especially in your improvement work. If you're currently doing somewhere, if you just, if you had some that you were doing previously, the structure of that work, what structures are at play? It could be a combination of structures as well. Let's just give you a few minutes. I might shorten the time to more like 3. And if you don't finish the structure, don't worry, you can keep working on it later, but just get your initial thoughts out. You're ready. This may be not finished yet, but what have you noticed in the structures of your work? What insight do you have about your own leadership structures? Becky, thanks for raising your hand, Becky.
Hi, I think, so where I currently work, we're just starting to pull together. It's been about 10 years in the making. I've been working in improvement for about 10 years, and we're just starting to pull together Contact Morganog Improvement CTM, as it's going to be called, and we've just appointed the Director of Improvements. It's all very exciting stuff, but it's all still very new. So I think currently for us, I think there's a bit of a mixture of, there's a very small team of us that are trying to support others with improvement, or but it's seen very much as our work to be done. So I think there's a bit of Lone Ranger and also a bit of hierarchy going on, because it's still uncharted territory. It's still very unknown how ICTM is going to look and how it's going to feel, how it's going to work, and all those sorts of things. But hierarchy is a big part of it, and it gets in our way an awful lot in terms of trying to drive some improvement forward, despite the fact that we've got a clinician as we've got a consultant who is our AMD for quality improvement. So thank goodness for her, because I think and we would struggle otherwise, I have to say. I have to be honest. Yeah. So I would say it's probably those 2 things.
And why do you think that you have those structures? Did you inherit them? Are you used to them? Is it how people, the culture of how you work? Where do you think it comes from?
I think it's the culture, but it appears to me, my observations of our culture are that despite new people coming into quite senior roles in the organisation. It's almost like the culture's intrinsic in the fabric of the buildings that we work in, or something. I don't know where it is hiding, that it kind of, it's a bit like Stranger Things. This alien just comes and takes over, and yeah, nothing ever changes. You get new people coming into the organisation and you think, oh, this is great, it's going to change at last, and then it doesn't. So you're constantly on the cusp of some great expectations, but it often falls short to that. And I feel like I'm being really, but I've worked in the organisation my entire career, so these are just, I've seen a lot of change, I guess, in the organisation to be able to kind of confidently say those things. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's a bit like the mid-staff stuff around. People come, they either think I can't work like this and they leave, or people come and they just adopt those entrenched culture. I don't know. It's quite fascinating, really, in some ways.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Culture,
yeah.
our expectations of each other and how we send each other signals as soon as we get in there. And how used to things we are in our entrenched cultures, and how intentional and how much work goes into creating new culture, even if it's just in one little unit or one little improvement team. Because everyone's used to operating a certain way, it's going to take that much more of a lift to create that intentionally in our improvement work. It doesn't mean we can't, though. It doesn't mean we can't. It's a real opportunity to do so. But let's acknowledge that it's not easy, that there are some entrenched structures and cultures that we're used to working within. I'm just going to keep us moving. I know there's some hands up, but I'm going to keep us moving because I want you to get to the second part of this exercise, which is what we mean when we're talking about distributing power, which is around getting many people across that organization, right? Or across your unit, or across your improvement team. And ideally, coming from it from multiple perspectives, if you mapped your actors, right, you've hopefully begin to co-design and co-produce with people from different perches whose assets you're gonna need to bring to bear in order to create the change that you want. And so then you're going to have multiple folks across the system, senior leaders, middle management, frontline staff, quality improvement coaches and advisors, HR, et cetera, working together to create the conditions to achieve these shared purposes. And so what we're going to encourage you to imagine is this notion of a snowflake, where the arrows are pointing in both directions. There's mutuality between people. Earlier when we talked about what does power and feeling empowered look like, it means, I think Heshem, it might have been you that said, is it when we're each achieving our interests. We're each exercising our assets to achieve our interests. And that can be experienced as transactional unless you've done some motivational work to ground that exchange in shared values. And that's when it becomes transformational. And you know the difference, right? When you've worked with a team that they're still your buds, right? Because you found such a deep level of trust and mutuality and support in the ways in which you worked around your shared values, even though you're both achieving your interests in your work together. That's the idea here, is that we have teams of individuals or of groups across our system where we're distributing that leadership and we're really sharing responsibility. Now, that means that we also have to make an investment in this structure. And that investment is in people's leadership. What does that mean? These structures don't just happen. Often, especially in improvement settings, there's a coaching culture that goes along with this, which is to help one another solve problems and keep them solved. We create coaching conversations within teams and across teams in order, first of all, for information to be transferred, but also to bring to bear the assets of the group to support one another to solve for problems, right? And so there is an investment. These don't just happen in really creating the leadership that's needed for people to feel effective and competent in leading whatever role or responsibility they have in the effort, given the assets that they bring. And hopefully that's very clear, that the interdependence around people's roles and responsibilities are named and it's identified so people know who to go to for what, in terms of what they're bringing to this effort. Now, that begs the question then of, well, what is leadership in this context? And I just want to offer you one definition. This is the definition that comes again from Marshall Gans, and it's about each of us individually accepting responsibility. So we accept responsibility to enable others. Now that's very different than that diva model, right? To enable others, to create enabling conditions, psychologically terrific conditions to achieve a shared purpose, one we have identified together, in the face of what is always an uncertain future. We don't know what's coming our way. Heck, a year ago, COVID hit, right? We didn't see that one coming. So we're constantly responding as adaptive creatures to new challenges and sometimes new opportunities. COVID also created plenty of opportunities for folks. It's a both. And it's also seeing constraints and turning them into opportunities. Now, in this model, leadership is a practice. So it's not, I'm the senior leader, it's a position. It's how I show up and the way in which I tell stories, I ask questions, I listen for understanding, I explore what people's interests are and how they can bring to bear the unique assets that they have. And I even know what they are because I'm in an authentic relationship with them. Those are practices that anyone at any level can bring to bear. And so in this model of leadership, you don't get authority, you earn authority. It's not something you have, although you may also have it in sort of an institutionally traditional way. But it really does depend. We have lots of senior leaders who do not exercise leadership, okay? And so the focus, again, really is on other folks. Now, we talked a little bit about this before, but I just want to hammer it home that it is through the snowflake, it's through those mutual exchanges where those arrows point in both directions that we make commitments to each other. And it's through those commitments and being accountable to them that we build trust, that sometimes we build motivation. We certainly bring to bear creativity and new assets, even feedback. And we enable one another to exercise our own autonomy and control around what we can do together. And so that's what we mean when we talk about power's relationship. I know Helen Bevan has been so wonderful in sharing Jeremy, is it Jeremy Timms? Do I have his name backwards? Anyway, the folks that wrote New Power, terrific book. And that's exactly what they're talking about here. They're using the language of new power and old power to talk about the difference between sort of this idea that somebody has it versus we can create it. It's like a current, it's electric. Yeah, Henry Timms and Jeremy Hymans. Thank you, Lou. Great. In fact, I'll look it up before the day is over, but there's a great HBR article on New Power that really gets at this, and also their book, obviously. Oh, what did I do here? A build slide, how fun. Okay, so again, these are sort of the benefits, the advantages of distributing power. I'm not going to read these, but this is the idea here. And I think I'll pull one thing out, which is the idea that if we're going to do this and we're hearkening back to co-design, right? We're going to have to make some decisions collectively. So it's important to notice in a distributed leadership structure, who's making what decisions when, and to be transparent about that. When is it the group's decision? How will we facilitate that for the group around its shared purpose? When do certain folks need to exercise their own autonomy and control and influence around what they're doing in their space, in their role and responsibility to the shared work? And just noticing what that looks like so that people don't feel that they're being told. I think a lot of our disempowerment is being told, this is what we're doing now. This is what you have to do. This is what the mandate is. This is be in compliance with. Whew, boy, that depleting, right? But if some of those decisions when they're made are who's making them and why they're being made that way, it sure helps. So even if it is a compliance-based mandate, it sure helps to say who made the decision and why it was made that way. And also, ideally, we're opening it up to getting some feedback loops going in that snowflake to ensure that it's something that is going to really land. That's where people are. It's what the group wants and how they see the work being workable for them. So I'm going to invite you guys to now imagine, and it doesn't have to be just a snowflake, but I want you to imagine your ideal state of what your improvement work could look like if you distributed more power. Okay, so moving in that direction. You might organize your teams by function. You might organize them by place. You might organize them by task or even identity and role. And we're looking for this mutuality piece where the arrow points both ways, so that it's not so much of the top-down mindset. And also it creates on-ramps for new people to join in, right? So that as you're gonna, this snowflake is fractal. It is a scalable strategy for building power across your system, unit after unit after unit, or stakeholder group after stakeholder group after stakeholder group, or task by task by task. And so as you think about scaling, this sort of model also is very helpful to bring more people on and grow that capacity as you go. So let's take another 3 minutes and just give you a chance to map, if you were distributing leadership more effectively, how would you draw sort of the ideal state? Again, you can combine models, or you can just take up the snowflake. About the good question Jonathan put in the chat. So Jonathan, you asked a great question about evidence for the snowflake structure. I'm more than happy to also just share with Sam a ton of articles, including a piece, some work in the UK around using the snowflake structure for large scale improvement efforts. But a couple of books that I'll just quickly recommend. One is Cascades. I'll put this all together for you, but it's by Greg Sattel, and it's about how to create a movement that drives transformational change. And it pulls on many different examples of how that has worked. It's really like network strategies, but as a snowflake model. Another great book that I think gets to the interdependence of, and many of you probably already read this, is Teaming. And anything by Amy Edmondson is always good, but she draws on, in the health sector in particular, a lot of great examples that draw on distributed leadership models. And then here's the other book I had mentioned, which is New Power. So these are all great reads if you're really interested in looking at that. And also I'll share like a few different types of examples from like classic quality improvement, like 1 million healthier lives, or the 1 Million Lives campaign that IHI ran, or age-friendly health system work, or which is totally set up as a distributed leadership structure, and then also community-based work. So for folks that are working more in the population health world, I'll send a couple examples where snowflake structure has been brought to bear. There are challenges with the snowflake structure. So I want to also, again, say, if you don't invest in the people and support the leadership of others, they will fall apart. They also have to have feedback loops. Those arrows do have to be bidirectional. It can't be a hierarchy masking as a snowflake. And so, there are definitely some pitfalls to avoid in building them. But thank you for that question. I like Charlie always, and I'm terrible at doing this, but we do want to invite challenging questions. When you're thinking, this doesn't add up to me, or this isn't quite resonant, or, well, how do you know that? All of those are important things to be asking here. I know we're all happy that we're feeling good, but it's okay to be really critical too. Okay, so let's get back into the slides. So what came up for folks as you created your snowflakes? How about Fiona? Fiona, are you with us?
I found I had arrows and dots all over my page, and I couldn't quite work out how things all linked together. So it was kind of a really useful exercise. And I found myself thinking, actually, the point you were just making about that avoiding hierarchies masked as snowflakes, and how you recognize when that's happening. And I found myself thinking a little bit about my children's school. They're in a Steiner school which operates on a collegiate basis, and how sometimes I think that's kind of based on that snowflake idea, but sometimes decisions take inordinately longer to make because of that, but are then very powerful at the end. So that's kind of what I found when I was trying to put it down on paper.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's important just to try to get it down, because sometimes it's like the tyranny of structurelessness, right? The structures that can be very enabling if the conditions are put into place to enable them to function effectively, and if folks can co-create them together, right? That they're clear on like what the structure is. So one thing I invite you to do is take this exercise to your team, take it to a colleague, and draw it together. Like, get playful, like see what this could look like. Have others, remember, we all have our own bias, right? So co-design really helps with this in thinking about what could these structures look like, what makes sense to different folks in the work together about what the ideal state is. And then, really the question is how to put it into place. Now, one thing to notice, and I know Sam's going to put this article in for you, it's called Accelerate. It was written in 2014 by John Cotter, who works at Harvard and has a consultancy practice, but he's, just a brilliant dude thinking about leadership all the time. And what he was noticing is that you can have more than one system at play. So often in our organizations we inherit hierarchy in, and we might see some dots in the center, or we may see some times when people come together and everyone's a leader, but nobody's getting anything done. Where you, especially when leading change, can create in an area a dual system that is, just imagine Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation curve. Okay, it's like layering the snowflake on top of the hierarchy. You've got two things functioning. You may need to organizationally have certain things going in the hierarchical manner, but in the improvement work, as you're distributing that leadership structure, you want to distribute it to get past that early majority, so that you can turn it into something that everybody does all the time, and then it's part of how you do business, right? So then you're back in hierarchy again. And for change work, it's super critical. We do this implicitly all the time through our relationships with people, just developing somebody who can help with this and does that, and pretty soon you have like a little mini snowflake rolling. And so the idea here is to be very intentional and structured in that thinking and the ways in which we take our improvement work forward, recognizing that we can have both. It's not an either or. And there is evidence around sort of the outcomes of using the networked distributed structures, especially when you're trying to create organizational change. So anyway, more that I'll send to you on that front, but just know that. So then the question for us is, okay, so if we have our state as it is, and we have our state as we want it to be, how are we going to move there? What are we going to do to put that in place? What are the behaviors? And we started with this. What are the behaviors for distributing power? I've listed a whole bunch here. Some of these you're probably already doing. Pay attention to those. Do more of them. Use your assets, right? Build off them. Some of these you probably aren't doing, right? So then notice one or two and think about, how could I challenge myself in the next month to explore more about how maybe I could set some explicit working agreements like we did today in the beginning of the day. Sometimes we're really afraid of doing that because we're afraid that people will think there's rules. Did you feel like we had rules today? Maybe. But did they feel enabling? Yeah, right? That's the idea here. So, you can do it in a way that doesn't make people feel like they're in kindergarten. You can do it in a way that makes them feel smarter and more capable, and like we're going to use the best assets of this team. So play around with that, right? And notice where you're also feeling like you're not doing something because something's coming up for you. Like, ooh, that feels a little scary to me, right? Ooh, that's something to explore, right? Okay, but what I want to do, instead of digging into any one of these, is I want to talk about one, which is around psychological safety, which I really think is the most important. And Amanda got us started here when she was talking about being the dot in the center. Because what often holds us back from distributing power is what she named, right? Fear. Remember that psychology of change piece? Distributing power might be change for you. It might be change for your colleagues. It might be change for your organization. It itself, to distribute power, might be improvement, and it might be change. Of course, you might need to measure that too. We're going to come back to measures. But look, so distributing power may be a new behavior for folks. And that means that there's going to be in ourselves and in others some fear about how that works, what that looks like, how to get into that. And they're real fears, like letting go of control or actually feeling accountable and not sure if others are up to the task, right? That their mistakes might reflect on you. Or maybe you're really putting your neck out there and you're actually afraid of the loss to your job or advancement. There's some real fear, okay? And it's legit. So how do we remember our work is to shift from fear into exploration? How do we encourage ourselves to explore that? And how do we encourage others to get under that fear, right? What do we need to put into place? So let's take a little page out of Amy Edmondson's book here. She's the one whose work on the fearless organization as well as on teaming, I highly recommend. And I think she's been working with Michael West quite a bit. So you've probably heard from Amy before, but she's going to talk a little bit about 3 things we can do to create psychological safety for ourselves and others, okay, in our improvement work.
So let me tell you 3 things that need to be done that make an enormous difference in creating psychological safety in the workplace. The first one is framing the work. And by that, I mean 2 things. Adding meaning to the work. Why is the work we do so profoundly important? People's lives depend upon it, for example. Now, you might think that's obvious and doesn't need to be said. I would argue it does need to be said, because when people in positions of leadership, as I said, all the way up and down the organization, remind us of what's at stake and why it's important, it brings us back to why we're here, why we're doing this. It brings us, in a sense, away from that need to manage others' impressions of us and back to the actual work that we do. But that's only the first part of framing the work. The second part is reminding people that the work we do is uncertain and is interdependent and has a lot of potential for error, potential for things to go wrong. If I remind you of the nature of the work we do, it makes it quite clear how important it is that we're open, that we bring our full selves to work. In other words, if I remind you the nature of the work, the riskiness of the work that we do, it just creates a kind of invitation for you to take it seriously and bring your full self to work. The second thing that leaders absolutely have to do is what I call model fallibility and invite input. So these are behaviors. These are really important leadership behaviors that help other people experience a sense of psychological safety. So by modeling fallibility, I mean very simple things. If you are the medical director, for example, of an intensive care unit, modeling fallibility might involve behaviors like saying, hey, I may miss something, I need your help. Now think about what a simple statement that is. It's a simple statement of fact. I may miss something. After all, I don't have eyes on the back of my head. I need your help. And so I'm modeling fallibility. I'm letting you know that I am a fallible human being, as we all are. Ergo, your input is crucial. So I'm modeling fallibility. The second thing I'm doing is I'm actively inviting input. What does that mean? Very simple. It means I'm asking questions. I'm saying, and often it's helpful to say directly your name, the other person's name, and say, what do you think? I'd love your input on this. What did you see? You were on the overnight shift. What did you notice? How are the patients doing? If I ask you a direct question, I lower the very real psychological costs of you having to speak up, or having to speak up in a situation of hierarchy. So by modeling fallibility, very simple, very straightforward way, by inviting input through asking genuine questions, I do an enormous amount wherever I am in the organization in creating psychological safety for others. The third thing that leaders must do to create psychological safety is what I call embrace messengers. When people speak up, when people offer ideas or point to a process failure, thank them. When people are willing and able to come to you and to offer their ideas, their concerns, it is absolutely crucial to thank them, to acknowledge and make it a positive experience rather than a negative experience. You've got to close that loop. Otherwise, people will initially take the invitation seriously, that you are serious, that you want people to bring their full selves to work. But if there's never anything in it for them, that behavior will die out over time.
Okay, thank you, Amy Edmondson. So, she's pretty special. Oh, here we go again. So, I get to the next. There we go. So here's what she said, basically. Here's a little summary for you. And it's in the slides, so I'm not going to repeat her, but she's brilliant. And so thinking about what's one or two of those things that you might try to create the container for psychological safety, both for yourself and others around feelings of fear, especially as you're changing some culture together that we talked about, right? And how you're going to work together. That's going to take being able to hold some tension in the work, which I'll tell you what, your relationships sure will help you lean into that. So the stronger those relationships are, and the more that framing work of why it matters to you, inviting others to share why it matters to them, that will really, those relationships, those motivations will come in, as well as these other behaviors that you see here. So inviting you to think about an application of one of those, and just a note before we go to break, which is around what is actually happening in the brain when we do this. What is actually there? This is a neurological pathway, right? And the idea here is this comes from the work of Bruce Perry, and actually Anna turned me on to Bruce's work in the first place, which is this idea that, and you can imagine sort of when people don't feel safe, their amygdalas are going nutso, right? You've got the threat, the fear, the fright or the flight or the freeze reaction going on. And so the first thing to do is just to calm that down. So mindful breathing, taking a break, letting time pass, finding ways to regulate that response. You may also support others in regulating their response when you see that occurring, when you notice somebody else might be a little afraid, and how to take a breath and create some calm in a situation. The second is to relate to folks. So this is getting then to sort of our higher level brain, where we're connecting, right? We're relating, we're using all those co-production skills of listening and asking questions and being attuned and reflecting back what we're hearing. And the third then is, once we are able to move, sort of soothe these areas of the brain, that's when we can be again in that prefrontal cortex where we can do some great problem solving together, right? So this is something like you can imagine. I was thinking about when my child recently came in from outside crying, had bumped his leg. And the first thing he did was he sat on my lap and I rubbed his back and he took some breaths and he calmed down. And then I talked to him about, you're okay. And, tell me what happened, et cetera. And then after that, he had settled down and he could get into this, we could problem solve how not to do that the next time, right? The improvement brain now kicks in and the learning brain kicks in. But to get to the learning brain, we've got to do the others. So if we're not creating psychological safety where people feel regulated and related to, then we're going to have a really hard time doing effective improvement work. All right, so let's get you to your break. Sorry, that was a little rah from me, but I was working on getting us through this time. So let's take a break. We'll come back in 10. So thank you for leading us in that. What a gift to us. And yes, this is a technique that you can use with your teams. Just taking 5 minutes out, keeping things calm, getting people present, letting it be a meditative space as people come into a room or a meeting until it's time for the meeting to start, for example, or building it into the practice as part of a break in the work that you're doing. And there's really good evidence why. It's also obviously often prescribed to folks who are feeling anxious or stressed. And so it's something we can do together. And it does help us improve our ability to cope, especially when we're holding a lot of intensity in our work, and can just slow our heart rate, physically bring us into an improved energy. So hopefully that will sustain for part of our afternoon here together. So, and by the way, I feel like I am literally in the UK. I keep going out and I'm jarred by seeing my family like eating breakfast or like the clock saying 9:30 in the morning. I'm like, what is happening? It's definitely the afternoon. Okay, so let's get into this. We're gonna complete our trip around the sun of the psychology of change here with adapting in action. And here we're talking about how to think about action as a motivational experience for learning, for being competent, for creating autonomy and control through the ways in which we design action and through the ways in which we think about how to respond to action in the plan, do, study, act cycle component of improvement. Lots of things we can do here. We've just chosen one. But partly, I named also with distributing power that coaching work that we can do so that the team can become more capable and competent together over time. Such a critical part if we're distributing leadership. And then also this notion of failing forward. This is an IHIism. I don't know if this translates. Does this translate, failing forward? Do you have some similar term? Use this term. Okay, just the notion that, certainly it's okay to fail. If we're developing psychological safety, we want to create spaces where we can get on that bike and fall off. So we know that we're not going to try that again, right? But it would be a real failure if we didn't actually learn from it. So it's the learning forward that we want to do here. And same thing with embracing emergence. I know we have after action reviews. What do you guys call it? It's like green light, red light, or what do you had a different thing that everybody seems to use in your system for like quick debriefs?
It's the same. Have the same expression.
Which one?
After action review.
You do.
After
Okay.
action reviews, yeah.
Yeah, it's typical project management stroke iterative cycles.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, we're speaking the same English. Anne was telling me that Duolingo is such an American application. Are you guys use Duolingo to learn languages? Anyway, she was so frustrated because she'd write in the British English and then it would come back to her American and she'd, sorry about that. Okay, so here we go. Anyway, let's get into it. So again, this notion here is that it's through action, which we want to give explicit, like we want to pay attention to the design of our action. So it's motivational, but it's also an opportunity to really adapt. And certainly when we're inviting people to join us in improvement, we have to assume and expect that it's not going to be the same in their context. Like I just did, like your language is different than mine, right? The ways in which you communicate might not be the same as me. And same thing with, the orthopedic surgery unit and the, pediatric unit and there's different cultures. There's different ways of being, there's different ways of taking things forward. So we have to think, what are the one or two things in our improvement we do want to see everywhere? Like that really aren't negotiable, that we have to reduce some variability around. But let's keep that as small as possible so that we can really activate people's agency around their own adaptive changes, their autonomy and control, their ability to see how it has meaning and purpose for them. So we want to do that. We want to design that as we're thinking, especially about scaling and moving forward. So part of that also means ourselves. Again, we started today with the same notion that we have to invite change. If we're unleashing folks' energy, then they're just going in the desired direction. They're going to take it on and make it theirs. We know that, right? So then that means that we have to ourselves exercise a growth mindset, as well as invite others into that growth mindset with us. That, lots of dots and centers can feel like it's scary to let go of control, but the growth is this whole idea here around moving into like seeking stretch experiences and overcoming deficiencies. This is Carol Dweck's work. And we're going to do a little exercise together as a growth exercise. And I hope this will also tie in a bit of our psychological safety work, which is something called the failures mode exercise. And we're going to do that because when we have a plan in place, when we have fears hidden in our brains, they're there. And we're responding because of those fears in our improvement work or our day jobs. When we have a plan to, first of all, name those fears, like what are they? And we can see them in the light of day. And we can ask ourselves, first of all, how likely is that thing to happen? How likely is that to happen? And second of all, how bad would it be if it happened? How severe? Would it tank this whole improvement project or not? And let's look at that objectively. Let's score it, in fact, between 1 and 10. We might have to ask others on our team to help us too. They may have their own ideas. And that will generate our total score out of 100 in terms of, you know, how bad is this in terms of a fear and if it actually came to be. And then what we do is we determine mitigation strategies. These may be strategies to prevent it from happening in the first place if it's really bad, right? Or it may be just, if it happens, I know what I'll do. There's some things I can put into play. Or even better, we know what we'll do and we can put into play. So we're gonna invite you now to spend, let's say, where am I in time here? It could be like 7 minutes to get started on this. And I think Sam has uploaded the exercise. It should look like this. So in your improvement work or in your work, start by just brain dump on the left-hand column. Just start naming all the things that are sort of like, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. I'm afraid of this. This is not working for me, right? All the failure modes, all the deep-seated fears. And then pick out a couple and score them and work on a mitigation strategy for some of them. Okay, so we'll give you 7 minutes to work on that. All right. So you may have not finished, but hopefully you got a bunch of ideas out and were able to get through a couple of your rows, giving some scores and thinking about some mitigation strategies. So what we're going to invite you to do in triads, you'll have 15 minutes to share with each other. Love for you to talk through one and also invite your colleagues to help you imagine some mitigation strategies for some of your stickiest wickets there. And then in addition to that, a reflection together around what came up for you in this exercise. What did you notice in yourself as you went through it? What did you observe? Okay, so a little co-coaching and then a little observational reflection. Okay, so you have 15 minutes now. Here we are again. It was fun in there. You're hanging in there, everybody. You're doing it. It's almost the end. But not yet. So let's talk about what came up in your conversations. This is the question, right? I'd rather just we look at each other. So I'm going to stop the share. Just like what came up for you in this exercise? What came up for you in your conversation? Let's hear from you.
So we noticed that it was quite a helpful exercise to actually think about the likelihood of things happening, and it wasn't me that actually pointed this out, but I liked it a lot. So when you actually score the likelihood, all of those things swirling in your head that might go wrong, it helps you think, okay, they're not all going to happen, and you know, it just helps you maybe focus your mind a little bit to actually do that exercise. So I found it really helpful.
Yeah, you know, it's sort of like asking yourself an open and honest question. It's like, can we just get underneath that fear for a second and look at it? Let's just look at it. My friend Becky Margiata calls it hugging the bear. You know, the big scary bear is coming after you and you've got the fear, the flight, and the fight going on. And it's like, actually, you have another choice. You could just hug it. You could just be like, hello there. Come sit at the table. You're not going to be the loudest voice at the table, but you can be at the table. You are a normal part of my experience, right? So yeah, so thanks. I think that's a wonderful insight from this exercise. Thanks, Emma and team. What else?
In our group, well, two things really. I spoke a little bit about the sort of subjective side of it. I think, as we just touched on there, so I spoke about the severity side, so how actually my perception of how severe something may be varies from my organization. Like for me, it might be a disaster if I don't get something done, but actually for them, it might not really matter. So how you kind of put different amounts of pressure on yourself, and that can sort of warp your view of severity. So trying to be objective. And then we were all actually, this is a slight aside, but all very honest about the fact that, you know, I kind of said, well, at the moment, I'm not really working on a big quality improvement project. So I've only done a little bit of this, but this is what I felt. And it was quite nice. We had quite a very open conversation about the fact that there were reasons why perhaps some of us felt this wasn't necessarily as related to the work they're doing, and reasons why had done a bit less. So it was quite nice, and that led into a bit of an open conversation about sort of sharing failures and learning from others, which was really enjoyable as well.
Yeah, terrific. I mean, this can apply in the improvement setting, and it can apply to any setting, right? Just like what our daily failure modes are, like how we're feeling about how we show up with whomever around whatever. And I love that insight about severity, because it brings us back to the co-design question of our own biases. You know, who's looking at it from what perch? And somebody has continued to chime in the chat, which I've seen and thought, yes, but I haven't said it, which is this question of whose voices are missing? Whose voices are missing, right? And also in the way in which we're looking at things, right? So coming back to biases over and over to like help ourselves also retain some objectivity can really help. Yep. What else?
I agree that we kind of all had very different stories or examples, but actually the thematic or the themes that were running through what we were talking about was around the complexity within which we work, and it's the sum of that complexity that will lead to us thinking about what the failure modes might be. And actually sometimes it's okay to say this is not fixable, but being honest about the fact that this isn't fixable is probably quite a good mitigation, because then you're kind of setting the expectation of what can be achieved in a given time frame. So it's about, you know, breaking down the size or the complexity of what you're dealing with to something that is more manageable, and being able to say, actually, these are the things that we can do something about now, or that you can come up with and help design the solutions for. But it's not about coming in with all of the answers all of the time as an individual. It's about putting it back to the teams you're working with to say, and what do you think the solution to this problem might be? So we talked a lot about that sort of.
It's a terrific insight. Thank you, Barbara. And also brings us back to this notion in asking open and honest questions of each other and holding space. And that itself can be an intervention, even if you can't fix it. Even if you can't fix it, that it can be an intervention to see it and name it and say, I hear that I hear your pain and describing that, and acknowledging limits and setting expectations and looking at what can be done, what you do have influence around. If you do join together to create a little power, what could be accomplished? Lovely insight. So thanks everyone for digging in. We've made up time. Woo! We did it. So we're gonna kind of get to our closing session here around application measurement, and then we'll close with some fun. So just by way of reminder, this is what we made it through today. We talked about co-design at the beginning of the day. We heard about the Recovery College. We thought about bias, about mapping actors. We looked at this notion of people-driven aim statements. And then we looked at what co-design looks like in action, right? And reflected on one or two ways we might pivot towards co-design in the coming month. Then we shifted into co-production in authentic relationship, and specifically picked up the practice of open and honest questions as a really foundational way to invite others in and to listen, to understand. Then from there, we moved into unleashing intrinsic motivation, and specifically honed in on story as one methodology for unleashing intrinsic motivations through our choices, demonstrating our values and our shared values around the work that we do, why it matters so much to help manage those competing priorities and motivate people to act. And then we had lunch and came back and went into distributing power. We had some really open conversations about power, about what it is, about what it feels like and when you're in a power over, power with, how to think about the structures through which you do your work and how you could move toward an ideal state as a change agent in the change work that you do, and as well as the practices that would move you from A to B, and specifically looked at one practice around psychological safety, right? And then from there, we took a little break and had a mindfulness exercise and came back and thought about adapting in action. And one way to think about being adaptive is being prepared to be. So we looked at failures modes and hopefully tied together a few other ideas around co-production and co-design and distributing power and unleashing intrinsic motivation, because at the heart of this all is interconnected, right? You're not doing one without the others. And also, you may have already known some of these skills coming into today, and hopefully we help deepen your knowledge and your practice. And you may have been introduced to new skills, wonderful. And you may have other skills in any of these domains, and don't forget them. Those are assets. Boy, those are so important to lean into. So, map your own tool set around these and think about what you're already doing well and how to build off what you already know. Okay, so the question for you is then, so what? So we did this, we had this great day together, and now what are we gonna do with it? And the first question is, what will you do with it? What will you do with this day? So I'd like to invite you to reflect. I'll just give you about 30 seconds, but to reflect in the chat, please. How you plan to apply these methods. It may be by next Tuesday, or it may be in the next month. But what's your thinking? Where will this fit into your life? Because you only learn this stuff by doing it. Getting right back on the bike. All right. Seeing folks adapt. One of the things they want to do is adapt and use what they need when they need it. So being open to what the world gives you in the universe and then manifesting one of these tools. We see some good commitments around storytelling and narrative. Seeing some discussion around the we in the model for improvement. So really locating that for others and why we're doing this work in an improvement mindset. Let's see, just noticing it in the work that you're doing and where it could tie in. Framing the joy and work project that we're doing, more relational sense. Yeah, so the relational aspect of building the infrastructure for change through our relationships and the power we need. Terrific, these are great commitments. Ooh, coffee with a colleague, James. Ooh, cross building here, Seema. Wonderful. Building some real commitment and community. Okay, thank you for these. Oh, so many are coming in. Okay, next question I have for you. What will we do together? What will we do together? Now, some of you may choose not to continue in this community, which is wonderful. And some of you may choose to continue in this community. I gotta tell you, 2 years ago when I was in London with some of you, this was the question we asked. And suddenly we had a Q community. You Charlie and Anna and Benna, do you guys want to describe what happened? I mean, you guys just made it happen. I know others too who are here. We're participating in that. Sam, Rachel.
We just had a very energetic day in London, didn't we? And it was a summer's day, and you put that question out to us, Kate, and it was at a time when Health Foundation was seeking applications to give out grants, and that's where this psychology for improvement idea came from via Anna, just gathering us together in a spirit of let's see how things go, let's have some conversations and see where it takes us. And I suppose it's the next step in that discovery now. Where will we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I felt very much a part of a community today, and I thank you all for contributing to that, especially virtually. I mean, the fact that we pulled that off is pretty spectacular, so thank you. And I invite you to reflect. We added a couple of columns in this Google Doc around ideas. What would be helpful to you in your ongoing growth and development around these practices or with these people? Is there further learning you wish to do? Is there deepening of learning? Are there other topics? Deepening of topics? ways to co-coach each other in your own work? Colin, go ahead.
I was still very keen to think about how we start to collect the metrics as evidence of impact around this to, I mean, depending on the type of trust that you're in and what resourcing you have, you might have an OD team or a HR team where, you know, some of the key indicators about, you know, dropout, burnout, engagement, you know, joy at work, satisfaction, etc., etc. They're also shared HR performance targets as well, or rather they should be, in terms of building culture. So I'd be very interested to know people's experiences of how we actually build those and monitor those.
Love it. So I'm hearing some interest specifically around measurement and infrastructure for that around these types of methods, and potentially a working group, for example, around that, of other like-minded folks in the community that would be interested in that. So Sam, would you mind jotting that one down in our Google Doc? Or Colin, you might want to put the words in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have tried. I mean, there are some tools out there. You know, there's the roadmap to QI culture change, and there's quite a few. There's over here we have the Aqua model. You know, there's a number of models which reflect this, but it's actually how do you. I haven't found anybody yet that's actually had the experience of running this for a while. And I think that community of practice around where we could become coach facilitator and upskill each other to do it would be a great opportunity.
Terrific. Yeah, I do think Anna Burhouse is in your zone. And that might be a follow-up conversation for the two of you and others around an emphasis there. Let's put it in there. Let's see if, you know, let's see what bubbles up and how we might take some of this forward. Are there other ideas?
There's something that I'd like to say.
Yeah.
So I found today just unbelievably interesting as a scientist working on impact focused work, completely not in healthcare. This has been just so illuminating. And so I would really be keen to stay connected to this community, because I think all the things I've heard today really connect to my experiences working on disaster and development related work and the challenges that we face. I think we're way behind you guys in terms of understanding how what we do can really create a positive change for people. And so I'm just really keen to stay connected and learn, and just wanted to say thank you. It's been amazing.
Thanks, Suzanne. Terrific. Some community of practice. Yeah, getting some hearts. Any others? I'm seeing what's coming up in the chat, Charlie. I can't, I'm terrible at two things at once. Oh, and then we'll call on you, Lou.
I mean, there's a lot of love for the stories. I think still Rachel's story from this morning really touched us, and I think a sense of how do we share stories. I think that's coming up. I mean, there's a lot, Kate. It's keeping up. Lou made a point about are there existing communities of practice in other parts of the world that we could connect to, which I think is really interesting.
Yep, good one. There is one. We'll get to that at the end. Good.
Can we get Marshall Gantz over to?
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to pitch it to him. You'll have the insider. He'll probably, if he can't do it online, then he'll probably send you back to me. But I can tell him to send him to another one of our colleagues who could bring you sort of a fresh perspective and eyes around.
There are the stars out there, aren't there? And then there's the assets that we all bring. So I think it's both, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and there's also a lot of folks that work in Marshall's network internationally who can bring a very different lens to story that I think might really resonate with you. And of course, as you know, Catherine and Helen are deep into narrative. And so you have some local assets right there at NHS Horizons around narrative workshops. Catherine's just superb. Somebody's hand was up. Lou, where'd you go?
Hi, I mean, Charlie said it really. We're doing this work that Rachel and Sam and the team are leading. over here, which is really great. And that's going to continue on beyond the life of the project. I think that's going to keep going. But how do we, for those of us that have connected today, and I know this is a particular passion of mine, a particular hot topic that I feel very close to, how do we go away and find other people around the world that are doing that and have those conversations? And how do we keep this momentum going? Because, you know, it's very easy to look for science QI and, you know, the measurement stuff. It's very easy to find people around that, but how do we build it in that sort of like global momentum for making this sort of build in that social way?
I mean, from my vantage point, you guys are it. You've created a community of practice. This is it. This is happening. The question is, what will you do with it? You've just created a whole bunch of power with. What are you going to do with that? And you've invested in each other, right? And you're learning. You have a huge opportunity here. Yeah, put that crown on. That's right. You should all be wearing crowns. It's terrific. I mean, let us not forget. Yeah, this is how it works. You guys have a lot of power. Yeah, so it's really, now, have we activated your agency? Right? Yeah, dude. I saw the pump.
It's worth kind of just reflecting that we didn't think we'd do this 2 years ago, and look where we are today. So, you know, a seed like this can grow and grow, can't it? And it is within our gift. And we'd just like to invite you all to carry on being part of the community if you want to be, because the more people, the better. The bigger, the merrier. It's great fun.
Mm-hmm. Lou, do you have one more little hand up there? Or was that the other hand?
I have got my hand up just to say that looking on Twitter today and doing some of the retweeting, I can see that on April 3rd last year, we were also talking to you, Kate. So we are moving this and we are having those continuous conversations. It's really nice. I'll put, if people want to put Twitter handles in the chat, Jude suggesting, please do follow the community on Twitter and also, again, on the Q community if you're part of that, so that we can keep in touch.
Yeah, okay, terrific. So let's keep this moving, but do reflect on what you might contribute to this community and how you might help advance it. If this was something that you valued, it's your opportunity to take it. It's an opportunity to live into our values, right? And I suspect, just as the team has done, it will not be a burden. It will be an exciting gift. All right, so let's quickly get back to Colin's prompt, which is, how do we know that these methods have any impact, right? Let us not forget, in fact, that we are improvers. I'm going to zip through this because we got other stuff to do. These will be in the slides. You can come back to it. But remember, we started with the fact that when you put these practices into play, storytelling, open, honest questions, distributing leadership, right? That you are after something. You're doing that to improve the outcome around your improvement project. So you want higher adoption rates. You want sustainability over time. Okay, so you can have, there are some things that you can measure when you take this forward, and every open and honest conversation is a PDSA,